Hello, friend. Some nights, the world feels heavier with questions than answers. Somewhere in the attic of human history, there are blueprints that changed everything and then vanished. Inventions that lit up entire civilizations, only to flicker out like candles no one thought to protect. And the people who made them, some simply walked into fog and never returned. Tonight, we're going to remember what the world forgot. Before we begin this quiet journey together, if you find comfort in these stories told softly, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, not for the algorithm, but as a way of saying, I was here, listening. Subscribe if you'd like more nights like this one, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet story can find you again when you need it most. Thank you for being here. Now, let's drift. There's something deeply human about forgetting. We think of memory as this vault, locked tight, preserving everything important. But history is more like water. It flows around what we try to hold, slips through our fingers, reshapes itself in ways we don't expect. And sometimes, the most brilliant ideas, the ones that should have echoed for centuries, just dissolve. Think about it for a moment. Right now, you're surrounded by technology, your phone maybe, the light above you, the fabric of your clothes, woven by machines descendants of looms invented hundreds of years ago. But for every invention we kept, there are dozens we lost. Not because they didn't work, not because they weren't beautiful or useful or revolutionary. Sometimes they vanished simply because no one wrote it down, or the person who knew the secret disappeared. Scientists call this phenomenon knowledge extinction. It's not quite the same as a species going extinct, but it carries the same weight of loss. A technique dies, a formula evaporates, a way of seeing the world, gone. And we don't always know what we've lost until centuries later, when archaeologists dig up something that shouldn't exist, something too advanced, too elegant, too impossible for its time. The strangest part? Sometimes we lose knowledge we desperately need. Ancient concrete that could heal its own cracks. Steel so pure it could slice through rifle barrels. Fire that burned on water. These weren't myths or exaggerations. They were real, documented, witnessed by thousands. And then, silence. But here's what makes these stories worth telling, especially on a night like this. They remind us that brilliance is fragile, that everything we take for granted, every light switch, every medicine, every word we can read because someone invented the printing press, exists because someone fought to preserve it. And they remind us that some of the greatest minds in history worked in shadows, unrecognized, their names erased by time or prejudice or simple, cruel forgetfulness. Tonight, we'll walk through empires that fell, taking their secrets with them. We'll meet inventors whose names you've never heard, even though their work lives in your pocket. We'll stand in museums, staring at objects that shouldn't exist, that mock our understanding of history. And we'll ask the question that haunts every archaeologist, every historian, every curious mind lying awake at 2 a.m. What else did we lose? But we'll do it softly, gently. Because these aren't stories of failure. They're stories of what it means to create something beautiful in a world that doesn't always know how to keep it. Let's start with something that sounds impossible. Imagine standing on the walls of Constantinople in the year 1673 AD. The city, what we now call Istanbul, sits like a jewel between two continents, Europe and Asia, guarding the narrow strait that connects the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. For centuries, it's been the most important city in the world, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the last keeper of Roman knowledge after Rome itself fell into darkness. But tonight, the city is under siege. Arab ships, hundreds of them, fill the harbor like a forest of masts. The largest naval invasion in history. Inside the walls, people pray. Soldiers sharpen swords they know won't be enough. And then, as the enemy ships advance, something happens that will echo through nightmares for the next 400 years. Byzantine sailors load strange brass tubes onto their ships. They aim them at the approaching fleet, and then fire. Not ordinary fire. Fire that sprays like water from a hose. Fire that sticks to wood, to cloth, to skin. Fire that can't be put out, not with water, not with sand, not by submerging the ship entirely. In fact, water makes it burn hotter. The Arab fleet doesn't just retreat, it burns alive on the water, screaming, melting. Men jump overboard to escape the flames, only to watch in horror as the fire follows them beneath the waves, turning the sea itself into an inferno. They called it Greek fire, and it saved Constantinople that night, and on dozens of other nights across 4 centuries. It was the secret weapon that kept the Byzantine Empire alive, long after it should have collapsed. Enemy generals feared it more than they feared dragons. Historians called it the atomic bomb of the medieval world, and we have absolutely no idea how it was made. The formula was guarded more carefully than gold, more carefully than the crown jewels. Only the emperor knew it. Only certain families, sworn to secrecy, generation after generation, were allowed to manufacture it. Soldiers who operated the flamethrowers never saw the liquid before it was loaded. They couldn't even describe its color. We know fragments. Ancient texts mention crude oil and resin and something called quicklime. Some historians think they use sulfur or saltpeter or even phosphorus. But here's the problem. None of those combinations in any ratio we've tried produces fire that behaves the way Greek fire behaved. Modern chemists have spent decades trying to recreate it. They've come close. Napalm burns on water, thermite can't be extinguished easily, but nothing matches the descriptions exactly. And then, in 1204, something unthinkable happened. Crusaders, Christian knights from Western Europe, supposedly allies, sacked Constantinople. They burned libraries. They melted down ancient manuscripts for the gold ink. They scattered the scholars, the craftsmen, the keepers of secrets. And somewhere in that chaos, the formula for Greek fire was lost. Just lost, like a candle blown out. Like a word you knew yesterday but can't quite remember today. Here's what keeps historians awake. Greek fire might have been an accident. Some recipes we've found suggest the Byzantines didn't fully understand why it worked. They just knew that it did. They mixed certain things in certain proportions because their grandfathers did, because it had always worked, because questioning it felt dangerous. And then, when the city fell, no one alive could explain the chemistry. The knowledge died with them. Do you ever wonder what else we've lost like that? Not just weapons or tools, but ways of thinking? Techniques so elegant we can't imagine them? Even today, with all our databases and cloud storage and redundancy, we lose things. File formats become unreadable. Companies go bankrupt and take their patents with them. Elders die before we think to ask them questions. But Greek fire is just the beginning. Let me take you somewhere else. Damascus, Syria, sometime around 1100 AD. A blacksmith's workshop, hot as a star. The smith is folding metal, heating it, hammering it, folding it again. Not once or twice, but hundreds of times, thousands. The steel he's creating has layers so thin you could count dozens in the width of a single hair. And when he's done, when the blade is finally polished and sharpened, you can see patterns in the metal, flowing patterns like water frozen mid-ripple, like wood grain, like the surface of a river catching light. They called it Damascus steel, or Wootz steel, and it was sharper than anything else on Earth. Swords made from Damascus steel could slice through European armor like paper. They could cut a falling silk scarf in midair. They could bend 90 degrees without breaking, then spring back perfectly straight. And they stayed sharp. Some accounts say a Damascus blade could be used for years without losing its edge. Knights who fought in the Crusades came home with stories that sounded like fairy tales. Swords that could cut through stone, metal that seemed almost alive. When European blacksmiths tried to copy them, their blades shattered or bent or rusted within months. And then, around 1750, the technique just stopped working. Not because of war, not because of some catastrophic event. The forges were still there. The blacksmiths still knew the motions: fold, heat, hammer, fold. But the steel that came out wasn't the same. The patterns were duller. The blades were brittle. Something had changed, and no one knew what. Scientists now think it was the ore. Damascus steel required a very specific type of iron ore, rich in trace elements, tungsten, vanadium, carbon in precise ratios. That ore came from mines in India, and those mines, after 1,000 years of use, simply ran dry. The blacksmiths of Damascus kept making swords the way they always had, not realizing that the magic was in the raw material, not just the process. When the ore changed, the technique became meaningless. We've been trying to recreate Damascus steel for 200 years. We've gotten close. Modern metallurgy can create similar patterns, similar strength. But we still don't fully understand how those ancient smiths achieved what they did, with nothing but fire and intuition. They didn't have microscopes. They didn't know about crystal structures or carbide networks. They just knew. Through generations of trial and error, through watching the color of the flame and the sound of the hammer, they perfected something we're still chasing. Imagine being the last smith who made a true Damascus blade. Did he know? Did he hammer that final sword into shape and feel somehow that this was the end? Or did he assume his son would continue, that the tradition would outlive him, that the world would always need swords? There's something quietly devastating about that, isn't there? The way knowledge can end not with a bang, but with a whimper, with a mine running dry, with a library burning, with an old man dying before the young man thinks to ask questions. And here's the thing that makes it even stranger. We're still finding Damascus blades in museums, in private collections, in archaeological sites. We can hold them, study them, even cut with them. They're still sharp after 700 years, but we can't make more. We're surrounded by the evidence of something we can no longer do. Have you ever felt that way about your own life? Like, there was a skill you used to have, something you could do without thinking, and now it's just gone? Maybe it's a language you spoke as a child. Maybe it's a recipe your grandmother made, and you never wrote it down. Maybe it's just a feeling, the way summer felt when you were 7, the way music sounded before you learned to analyze it. Something true and unrepeatable, lost not because it was taken, but because you forgot to hold on. History is full of these quiet losses, and we're only just beginning. Let me tell you about concrete. Yes, concrete, that gray, boring stuff under every sidewalk and skyscraper. You wouldn't think there's mystery there. But here's the thing. The Romans made concrete 2,000 years ago that's still standing. The Pantheon in Rome, a massive dome, bigger than most modern buildings, built in 126 AD, has survived earthquakes, wars, floods, and the slow erosion of 2 millennia. Its concrete is harder today than the day it was poured. Meanwhile, modern concrete, 50 years, maybe 100 if you're lucky, and it starts to crack. Highways crumble. Bridges need constant repair. We pour more concrete now in 2 days than the Romans used in a century, and yet, theirs was better. How is that possible? For centuries, engineers assumed Roman concrete was just thicker, or luckier, or perhaps exaggerated by history. But then scientists started looking closer. They took samples, tiny fragments from ancient harbors, aqueducts, buildings, and what they found was remarkable. Roman concrete isn't just sitting there, inert and slowly decaying. It's alive, in a way. When seawater gets into cracks, something that would destroy modern concrete, the Roman mixture actually heals itself. Minerals in the water react with volcanic ash in the concrete, creating new crystals that fill the gaps. The concrete gets stronger over time, not weaker. It took us until 2017 2017 to figure out the recipe. Volcanic ash from a specific region near Naples, seawater, lime, mixed in proportions that the Romans documented but that we'd stopped using, assuming we knew better. We didn't. For 1,500 years after Rome fell, we built with inferior concrete because the formula was lost, not destroyed, not hidden, just forgotten. Because the people who knew it died, and the people who came after assumed that if it was important, someone would have written it down more clearly. But some secrets were written down, carefully and obsessively, and still we can't crack them. Which brings us to perhaps the strangest object in this entire story. Imagine you're a sponge diver off the coast of a Greek island in 1901. You're holding your breath, deep underwater, searching for sponges to sell, and then your hand touches something. Metal, ancient, encrusted with coral. You pull, and more pieces come up. Statues, jewelry, the wreck of a ship, 2,000 years old, and inside it, a lump of bronze and wood, corroded beyond recognition. For decades, that lump sits in a museum, ignored, until one day, someone cleans it carefully and realizes it's a machine. A machine with dozens of bronze gears, precisely cut, interlocking, the kind of gears you'd expect to find in a Swiss watch from the 1800s, not in an artifact from 100 BC. They called it the Antikythera mechanism, after the island where it was found. And when scientists finally decoded what it did, the world of archaeology nearly collapsed. It's a computer, not metaphorically, not in spirit. A literal analog computer designed to predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets with astonishing accuracy. It could calculate eclipses. It could account for the irregular orbit of the moon, something we didn't officially figure out until Kepler, 1,600 years later. It had dials for the Olympic Games, for Egyptian and Greek calendars, for planetary cycles that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. And it was just sitting on a Roman ship. Probably not even the only one. Probably a fairly common tool for astronomers of the era. Which means, somewhere in the chaos of Rome's fall, we lost an entire technological tradition. Not just one device, but the knowledge of how to make it, how to use it, what it meant. For 1,000 years, the most advanced clockwork in Europe was a simple water clock. And all the while, rusting on the ocean floor was proof that we'd once known so much more. Do you see the pattern forming? Greek fire, Damascus steel, Roman concrete, the Antikythera mechanism. These aren't just random losses. They're proof that progress isn't a straight line. It's not always forward. Sometimes civilization climbs to an incredible height and then forgets how it got there. And the people? Oh, the people who made these things. We'll meet them soon. The inventors whose names were erased. The geniuses who died alone. Their notebooks burned or buried or simply thrown away. The ones who changed the world and got nothing. Not fame, not fortune, not even a footnote in the history books. But for now, just sit with this feeling. The weight of everything we've lost. The blueprints burned in ancient libraries. The techniques that died with their masters. The objects we can hold but not recreate. It's not a sad story, not exactly. It's more like a reminder that everything fragile is also precious. That the things we assume will last forever, buildings, books, even memories, are only as permanent as the people who care for them. And maybe, just maybe, it's a call to pay attention, to write things down, to ask the old man how he fixed the watch before it's too late, to preserve not just the what, but the why and the how, because somewhere, right now, someone knows something extraordinary, a recipe, a technique, a way of seeing the world that no one else has. And if we're not careful, if we don't listen, one day we'll be the ones standing in a museum, staring at an artifact we can't explain, wondering how we let something so beautiful slip away. But we're not done with ancient wonders yet. In fact, we're just getting started. Now, let's drift deeper into something that feels almost like magic. Picture this. You're holding a violin, not just any violin, a Stradivarius made in 1704 by Antonio Stradivari in his workshop in Cremona, Italy. When you draw the bow across the strings, the sound that emerges doesn't just fill the room, it fills the soul. Musicians describe it as singing, as if the instrument is alive. Scientists measure it and find something inexplicable. The tone is richer, warmer, more complex than any violin made since. 300 years later, we still can't figure out why. Modern luthiers, master violin makers, have spent lifetimes trying to recreate that sound. They've analyzed the wood grain, the varnish, the thickness of every curve. They've used CT scans and spectroscopy and even artificial intelligence. Some have succeeded in making violins that sound close, very close, but never quite the same. There's always something missing, some invisible quality that died with Stradivari. The theories are endless. Maybe it was the wood, trees that grew during the Little Ice Age, when colder temperatures created denser growth rings. Maybe it was the varnish, recipes lost when Stradivari's sons died without heirs. Maybe it was the water he used to soak the wood, mineral-rich from alpine streams. Or maybe, and this is the theory that haunts violin makers most, maybe it was something he did instinctively, without thinking, something so obvious to him that he never wrote it down. Here's what we know for certain. Stradivari made roughly 1,000 instruments in his lifetime. About 600 survive today, and every single one is different. He was constantly experimenting, adjusting, searching for perfection, which means the secret, if there ever was one unified secret, was never quite stable enough to pass on. It was always evolving, always just out of reach. And when he died in 1737, at the age of 93, that evolution stopped. There's something deeply human about that, isn't there? The idea that some knowledge can't be taught, only felt. That mastery isn't just about following steps, but about 10,000 hours of listening, adjusting, intuiting. You can't write down feel. You can't document just enough. And so, when the master dies, a little piece of human capability dies with them. But at least we still have the violins. We can hold them, play them, remember what we lost. Some losses are more complete than that. Let me take you to Persia, modern-day Iran, around 400 BC. The desert is brutal here. Temperatures soar past 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. Nothing should survive, and yet there's ice. Not a little ice. Tons of it, stored year-round in massive dome-shaped buildings called yakhchals. Imagine standing in the middle of a sun-scorched desert, opening a door and stepping into winter. The air inside is cold enough to see your breath. Along the walls, blocks of ice are stacked from floor to ceiling. Ice harvested from the mountains in winter, transported across impossible distances, and stored here without refrigeration, without electricity, without anything we'd recognize as modern technology. How is that possible? The yakhchal is a masterpiece of passive engineering. The walls are 2 meters thick, made from a special mixture of sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash. This mixture, called sarouj, is naturally insulating and nearly waterproof. But the real genius is in the shape. That dome isn't decorative, it's functional. Hot air rises and escapes through vents at the top, while cool air from underground channels flows in from below, creating a constant circulation. The building essentially breathes. Some yakhchals had wind catchers, tall towers that caught the breeze and funneled it down into the ice chamber, cooling it even further. Others were positioned near qanat systems, underground aqueducts that brought water from mountain snowmelt. At night, when temperatures dropped, water would be poured into shallow pools. The desert's extreme temperature swing, scorching by day, freezing by night, would turn that water to ice. By morning, workers would collect the ice and move it into the yakhchal before the sun rose. For over 2,000 years, this system worked perfectly. Persians had ice cream in summer. They had cold drinks, They had access to preserved food in a climate that should have made preservation impossible. And they did it all without burning a single drop of fossil fuel, without a single moving part that could break. And then, we forgot how to build them. Not dramatically, not suddenly. It was gradual. As electricity spread through the Middle East in the 20th century, refrigerators became cheaper, easier, more convenient. Why maintain an ancient ice house when you can just plug in a freezer? Why study the old techniques when the new ones seem so much better? By the 1960s, most yakhchals were abandoned. Some collapsed, some were torn down to make room for modern buildings. The few that remain are tourist attractions now, monuments to a way of thinking we no longer value. And the knowledge of how to build them, the exact ratios of sarouge, the precise angles of the dome, the calculations for airflow and insulation. That knowledge lives only in academic papers now, archived and rarely read. Here's the tragedy. We need that knowledge. As climate change accelerates, as energy costs soar, as we realize that our modern solutions aren't sustainable, engineers are racing to rediscover passive cooling techniques. Buildings that don't need air conditioning, cities designed to breathe. And they're looking back, way back, to cultures we once dismissed as primitive. Turns out the Persians weren't primitive. They were brilliant. They just solved problems differently than we do. Do you ever wonder what else we gave up in the name of progress? What quiet, elegant solutions we traded for loud, expensive ones? Let's talk about color, specifically a color that shouldn't exist. The ancient Maya, who built towering pyramids in the jungles of Central America, who developed a mathematical system that included the concept of zero long before Europe did, who tracked Venus with such precision that their calendar was more accurate than the one Julius Caesar used. They also invented a blue pigment that has baffled scientists for decades. It's called Maya blue, and it's everywhere in Mayan art. On murals that have survived in the humid jungle for over 1,500 years. On pottery dug up from cenotes, underwater caves where the Maya made offerings to their gods. Even on human bones, sacrificial victims painted blue before being thrown into sacred wells. Here's what's strange. Most ancient pigments fade. The Egyptians had brilliant reds and yellows, but after 3,000 years of sunlight and moisture, they have dulled to browns and creams. The Romans had purples made from sea snails, so expensive that only emperors could wear them. But those purples have long since turned muddy gray. Every museum in the world is full of ancient art that was once vibrant, but is now ghostly, its colors leached away by time. But Maya blue, still vivid, still bright as the day it was painted. Scientists couldn't explain it. Blue pigments are notoriously unstable. Ask any artist. They break down in acid, in heat, in humidity. And the Maya lived in one of the most hostile environments imaginable for preserving color. A jungle that's hot, wet, and teeming with microbes that devour organic material. Their murals should have dissolved centuries ago, but they didn't. For decades, chemists assumed Maya blue was just a lucky mineral, some natural ore with unusual properties. But when they analyzed samples under electron microscopes, they found something astonishing. It wasn't a simple pigment. It was a nanocomposite, a hybrid material created by bonding indigo dye with a specific type of clay called palygorskite, then heating the mixture to precise temperatures. The result is a substance that's chemically unlike anything else in the ancient world. The dye molecules are trapped inside the crystal structure of the clay, protected from decay. Acids can't reach them. Heat can't break them down. Even modern industrial solvents barely affect it. Maya blue is, quite literally, indestructible. And here's the part that makes archaeologists' heads spin. The Maya invented this in 800 AD. They didn't have beakers or thermometers or any understanding of molecular chemistry. They just figured it out. Through trial and error, through generations of experimentation, they created a material that modern science didn't fully understand until 1996. But then the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, and with them came disease, conquest, and the systematic destruction of Mayan culture. Books were burned, codices filled with astronomical observations, mathematical proofs, medical knowledge, and yes, almost certainly instructions for making pigments. Temples were torn down, priests were killed, and the technique for making Maya blue vanished. For 400 years, no one knew how it was made. Artists who wanted to restore Mayan murals had to guess. Museums could analyze the pigment but couldn't recreate it. It wasn't until the late 20th century that chemists finally painstakingly reverse-engineered the process. But even now, we don't know everything. Why polygorskite specifically? Why that temperature range? Did the Maya discover this by accident, or did they understand, on some intuitive level, what they were doing? We'll never know. The people who knew are gone. The books that might have explained it are ash. And this happens over and over again, not just with the Maya, but with cultures all over the world. Take the Polynesian navigators, people who sailed across thousands of miles of open ocean in wooden canoes, without compasses, without maps, without any of the tools European sailors considered essential. They navigated by reading the stars, yes, but also by reading the waves. They could feel the subtle difference in swell patterns caused by distant islands, could interpret the flight paths of birds, could taste the water, and know if land was near. It was a form of knowledge so embodied, so intuitive, that it couldn't be written down. It had to be learned by doing, by feeling, by spending years at sea with a master navigator. And when European colonization disrupted traditional lifestyles, when young Polynesians were forced into schools that taught Western navigation, when elders died before they could pass on their knowledge, that entire system nearly died. By the 1970s, only a handful of people in the entire Pacific still knew how to wayfind in the old way. It took a desperate, decades-long effort to preserve it. Elders were recorded, interviewed, begged to teach one more generation. A traditional voyaging canoe called Hokulea was built and sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976, using only ancient techniques to prove that the old knowledge still worked. And slowly, the art of wayfinding is being revived, but it was close, so close to being lost forever. Here's what keeps me up some nights. How many techniques have we already lost without even knowing it? How many elegant solutions did indigenous cultures develop over thousands of years of observation, only to have that knowledge dismissed as primitive or superstitious? How much wisdom is buried in unmarked graves, in languages no one speaks anymore, in traditions interrupted by colonization or genocide, or simply the march of modernity? Think about your own grandparents, your great-grandparents. What did they know how to do that you don't? Maybe it's something small, how to darn socks, how to preserve vegetables without a refrigerator, how to predict weather by watching the sky. Maybe it's something bigger, a craft, a language, a way of seeing the world. And when they're gone, what goes with them? There's a concept in ecology called an extinction cascade. When one species dies out, it doesn't happen in isolation. That species was part of a web. It pollinated certain flowers, was eaten by certain predators, kept certain other species in check. When it vanishes, the whole web trembles. Other species decline, ecosystems collapse. The loss ripples outward in ways we can't always predict. Knowledge works the same way. A technique is never just a technique. It's connected to a worldview, a way of thinking, a set of values. When Damascus steel stopped being made, we didn't just lose a method for forging swords. We lost a relationship with metal, a way of seeing it as something alive, something that could be coaxed and shaped and understood through patience. When the Yakchals were abandoned, we didn't just lose a cooling system. We lost a philosophy of design that valued harmony with nature over dominance of it. And maybe that's the real loss. Not just the objects themselves, but the minds that created them. The kind of intelligence that doesn't rush, doesn't assume it knows better, doesn't forget that every innovation rests on the shoulders of people who came before. There's a building in Rome called the Pantheon. I mentioned it briefly before. It's almost 2,000 years old, and it's still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, larger than any dome built during the Renaissance, larger than most domes built today. When Michelangelo saw it, he reportedly said it looked angelic, not human. For over 1,000 years after Rome fell, no one in Europe could build anything like it. They tried. Medieval cathedrals have domes, but they needed flying buttresses, thick walls, external support structures. The Pantheon just stands there, light and graceful and impossible. The Romans knew something we forgot, and it took us 15 centuries to remember. But here's the hopeful part. We did remember. Scientists cared enough to study those old walls, to decode those ancient recipes. Engineers cared enough to test and experiment and learn. And now, we're building with Roman concrete again. Not as a novelty, but because it's genuinely better for certain applications. Especially in marine environments, where modern concrete crumbles but Roman concrete thrives. The knowledge came back. It took time and effort and humility. The humility to admit that people 2,000 years ago might have been smarter than us in some ways, but it came back, which means other knowledge can come back too, if we care, if we look, if we listen to the elders and the historians and the archaeologists who are desperately trying to preserve what's left before it's too late. Not everything is lost forever. Some things are just sleeping, waiting for someone curious enough, patient enough, humble enough to wake them up again. And that brings us to the people, the ones who held these secrets, who created these wonders and then vanished. Sometimes, the cruelest disappearance isn't of an object or a technique, it's of a name, a person who changed everything, and then silence. Let me tell you about a woman who invented the future and died thinking she'd failed. Her name was Hedy Lamarr. You might recognize her face. She was a Hollywood star in the 1940s, often called the most beautiful woman in the world. Her image sold millions of movie tickets. But what she wanted to be remembered for had nothing to do with beauty. In 1942, in the middle of World War II, Hedy sat in her living room with a composer named George Antheil. They were working on a problem that had haunted her since fleeing Austria: how to stop enemy forces from jamming radio signals used to guide torpedoes. The Navy was losing ships because German U-boats could detect the single-frequency radio waves and block them. Hedy had an idea. What if the signal didn't stay on one frequency? What if it jumped randomly across dozens of frequencies so fast that the enemy couldn't keep up? She called it frequency hopping. And she didn't just theorize it. She built a working prototype using the mechanics of a player piano. 88 keys, 88 frequencies, synchronized between the torpedo and the ship. The patent was filed under her married name, Hedy Kiesler Markey. Patent number 2,292,387. The Navy rejected it. They told her she'd be more useful selling war bonds and looking pretty. The technology sat in a drawer for 19 years. 19 years. And then, quietly, the military started using it. Not officially, not with credit. But by the 1960s, frequency hopping was standard in military communications. And by the 1990s, it was everywhere. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, cell phones. Every time you connect to wireless internet, every time your phone finds a signal in a crowded room, you're using Hedy Lamarr's invention. She was finally recognized in 1997, at the age of 83. By then, she was living alone in Florida, nearly blind, broke, having spent decades thinking her one great contribution to the world had been ignored. She died 3 years later. The world built itself on her idea, and most people still only know her as an actress. There's something quietly devastating about that, isn't there? To give the world a gift, to solve a problem no one else could, and to watch as everyone else gets the credit, the patents, the billions of dollars, while your name fades into footnotes. But Hedy's story, at least, has a partial redemption. She was recognized eventually. Some inventors never get even that. Let me take you to a laboratory in Oak Park, Illinois, in the 1930s. A young black chemist named Percy Julian is working with soybeans. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing that makes headlines. He's trying to synthesize a chemical called physostigmine, a compound that occurs naturally in calabar beans and can treat glaucoma. But calabar beans are rare, expensive, impossible to farm in large quantities. If Percy can make physostigmine from soybeans, which grow everywhere, cheaply, he could save millions of people from blindness. He succeeds. In 1935, at the age of 36, he becomes the first person to chemically synthesize physostigmine. It's a breakthrough that should have made him famous. But Percy is black in 1930s America, and most universities won't hire him. Most labs won't let him through the door, so he takes a job at a paint company. Glidden. Yes, the paint company, because it's the only place that will give him a lab. And there, working with soybeans that the paint company uses for industrial coatings, Percy does something extraordinary. He figures out how to mass-produce synthetic hormones, first progesterone, then testosterone, then cortisone. Cortisone especially is a miracle drug. It treats rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, severe allergies. Before Percy's work, cortisone cost hundreds of dollars per gram. After, pennies. He saved countless lives. He made treatments affordable for people who couldn't have dreamed of them before. And he did it all while facing death threats. His house was firebombed twice by neighbors who didn't want a black family in their neighborhood. When he died in 1975, few people outside the chemistry community knew his name. There's a statue of him now at DePaul University, a postage stamp with his face. But for decades, his work was attributed vaguely to researchers at Glidden, as if the company, not the man, had done the thinking. How many other Percy Julians are out there? How many brilliant minds were turned away from universities, denied funding, erased from history because of their skin color, their gender, their accent, their inability to play the game of academic politics? The loss isn't just personal, it's collective. Every time we silence a genius, we lose the discoveries they might have made, the problems they might have solved, the futures they might have built. Let's talk about another name you've probably never heard, Philo Farnsworth. Close your eyes for a moment and think about television. Not streaming, not YouTube. I mean the fundamental technology. The way moving images are captured, transmitted, and displayed on a screen. Who invented that? Most people guess Thomas Edison or maybe RCA or some big corporation with unlimited resources. But the truth is stranger and sadder than that. Philo Farnsworth invented electronic television when he was 14 years old. 14. He was plowing a potato field in Idaho in 1921, and he looked at the rows, straight parallel lines, and thought, what if you could scan an image the same way? Line by line, capturing light and converting it to electrical signals? By the time he was 21, he'd built a working prototype, the first electronic television transmission in history. A single straight line, glowing on a screen. His financial backers reportedly said, "When are we going to see some dollars in this thing?" Philo turned to the camera and transmitted a dollar sign. He should have become rich beyond imagining. Television became the dominant medium of the 20th century. Entertainment, news, culture, all flowing through the device he invented. But Philo spent his entire adult life in court, fighting patent battles against RCA and other corporations that stole his designs. They had armies of lawyers. He had a small team and dwindling funds. By the time he won some of his cases, his patents were about to expire. He made almost no money from television, and worse, much worse, he spent his final years haunted by what television had become. He'd imagined it as an educational tool, a way to bring knowledge into every home. Instead, he watched it become a vehicle for advertising, for violence, for what he called the decay of culture. In 1957, his son asked him, "Dad, Is there anything you've done that you're proud of? Philo thought for a long moment and said, "Yes. I'm proud that I never wanted to invent anything that could kill people." He died in 1971, bitter and depressed, largely forgotten. Today there's a statue of him in the U.S. Capitol, one of the 2 statues representing Utah. But how many people walking past it know who he is? How many people watching television right now know that the technology was born in the mind of a 14-year-old farm boy who wanted to change the world? And here's what breaks my heart most about these stories. It's not just that these people were forgotten, it's that they knew. Hedy Lamarr knew her invention was being used without credit. Percy Julian knew he should have been at Harvard, at MIT, not fighting for basic recognition. Philo Farnsworth watched his dream being corrupted in real time. They didn't die peacefully, thinking their work would outlive them. They died knowing the world had taken what they offered and given nothing back, not even their names. But let's go even deeper. Because sometimes the erasure is so complete that even scientists who know the story have to fight to correct it. Day 1952, King's College, London. A young chemist named Rosalind Franklin is using X-ray crystallography to study DNA. It's painstaking work. You fire X-rays at crystallized molecules, capture the diffraction pattern, and try to deduce the structure from the shadows. It takes precision, patience, and an almost artistic eye for patterns. Rosalind is brilliant at it, and in May 1952, she captures an image, Photo 51, they call it, that shows DNA structure more clearly than anyone has ever seen before. It's an X shape, elegant and unmistakable. The double helix, right there in the shadows. But Rosalind is careful. She wants more data before publishing. She wants to be certain. Meanwhile, across campus, her colleague Maurice Wilkins shows Photo 51 to 2 other scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick, without her permission. Without even telling her. Watson and Crick look at that image and immediately understand what they're seeing. They build their famous model of DNA, the twisted ladder, the base pairs, and publish it in 1953. The paper that changes biology forever. The discovery that will win them the Nobel Prize. Rosalind Franklin is mentioned once in a footnote as someone who provided helpful data. She died in 1958 of ovarian cancer, likely caused by her unprotected exposure to X-rays. She was 37 years old. The Nobel Prize was awarded in 1962, 4 years after her death, to Watson, Crick, and Wilkins. The Nobel is never given posthumously, so Rosalind couldn't be included. But here's the question that haunts historians. Would she have been included even if she'd lived? For decades, textbooks taught that Watson and Crick discovered DNA structure. Only recently have some started saying they determined it based on Franklin's data. The word stole is rarely used, but it hangs in the air. And Rosalind isn't alone. There's a pattern here, especially with women in science. Chien-Shiung Wu, a physicist at Columbia University, designed and conducted one of the most important experiments in 20th century physics, the Wu experiment, which proved that the universe has a fundamental asymmetry. Her male colleagues, who had only proposed the theory, won the Nobel Prize in 1957. She was never even nominated. Lise Meitner, who discovered nuclear fission, the splitting of the atom, was left off the Nobel Prize given to her male research partner. The element meitnerium is named after her now, but that's cold comfort when history books credit Otto Hahn alone. Jocelyn Bell Burnell discovered pulsars, rapidly spinning neutron stars that changed our understanding of the universe. Her thesis advisor won the Nobel Prize for it. She didn't. Over and over and over again. The work is done by women, by people of color, by anyone outside the narrow circle of power. And the credit goes to someone else, someone more palatable, someone easier for history to remember. It's not just tragic, it's theft. But here's what gives me hope. On nights when these stories feel too heavy, we're starting to correct them. Rosalind Franklin has buildings named after her, awards in her honor. Percy Julian is taught in chemistry classes now. Hedy Lamarr is finally recognized as an inventor, not just an actress. The work of excavating these buried names, of pulling them back into the light, is ongoing. And there's another name I want to tell you about. Someone whose story was buried for almost a century and only recently resurfaced. Her name was Alice Ball. She was 23 years old in 1915 when she became the first woman and the first black person to graduate with a master's degree from the University of Hawaii. Her thesis was on the chemistry of a plant called the chalmugra tree, whose oil was used, ineffectively, to treat leprosy. Leprosy, or Hansen's disease, was a death sentence. People diagnosed with it were exiled to remote islands like Molokai and Hawaii to live out their days in isolation. The chalmugra oil helped a little, but it was thick, sticky, impossible to inject, and caused horrific stomach pain when swallowed. Alice figured out how to modify the oil chemically, breaking it down into its component fatty acids, making them water-soluble so they could be injected directly into the bloodstream. It worked. For the first time in history, leprosy was treatable. People left the isolation colonies. Families were reunited. Lives were saved. Alice died a year later, at 24, in a laboratory accident. The details are murky. Some say she inhaled chlorine gas. She never published her findings. And here's where the story gets dark. The president of the university, a man named Arthur Dean, took her research and published it under his own name. He called it the Dean Method. For 78 years, that's what it was known as. The treatment that saved thousands of lives was credited to a white man who did none of the work. It wasn't until 2000, that a historian named Catherine Takara uncovered the truth. She found Alice's original thesis, unpublished notes, records that showed the timeline. The university finally acknowledged her in 2007, renaming February 29th Alice Ball Day. But by then, almost everyone who'd known her was dead. The people she saved never knew her name. How does that happen? How does someone so young, so brilliant, so revolutionary just disappear? Part of it is systemic. Academia in the early 20th century was a closed door for women and people of color, but part of it is something darker, something deliberate. Someone looked at Alice Ball's work and decided, consciously, to erase her name and write his own. And that's the scariest kind of disappearance, not the accidental kind, where knowledge is lost because no one wrote it down, or a library burned, or a technique was too intuitive to teach, but the intentional kind, where someone sees brilliance and decides to bury it, to steal it, to make sure the world never knows who really lit the candle. Do you ever wonder how many other Alice Balls there are? How many names will never recover because someone destroyed the evidence too thoroughly? I think about that sometimes. Late at night, when I'm reading about these forgotten geniuses, I imagine a parallel history, a world where Hedy Lamarr was celebrated as an inventor from the start, where Percy Julian was given a lab at Harvard, where Philo Farnsworth got rich enough to guide television towards something beautiful, a world where Rosalind Franklin lived to accept her Nobel Prize, where Alice Ball's name was on every bottle of leprosy treatment. What would that world look like? How much further ahead would we be if we hadn't wasted so much brilliance? But here's the thing. These people didn't disappear completely. Their work survived. It's in your Wi-Fi. It's in your cortisone cream. It's in the television you watch, the medicines you take, the very structure of your DNA as we understand it. They're ghosts, yes, but ghosts that built the world. And maybe that's the lesson. That good work survives, even when names don't. That the universe has a way of preserving truth, even if history doesn't always preserve credit. But still. Wouldn't it be nice if just once we got it right the first time? If we recognized genius when it stood in front of us, regardless of what it looked like? These are the people who vanished, not into thin air, but into footnotes, into erasure, into the shadows behind brighter, louder, more acceptable names. But we're pulling them back now, slowly, one biography at a time, one statue, one award, one moment of recognition. They deserve better. They deserve so much better. And the machines they left behind? Oh, the machines. Some of them are stranger than you'd ever believe. But genius doesn't only live in people. Sometimes it lives in machines, in devices that change medicine, that saved countless lives, and then became obsolete, or worse, became cautionary tales. Let me take you to a hospital room in 1928. A child is lying in bed, unable to breathe on her own. Polio has paralyzed her respiratory muscles. Without help, she'll suffocate within minutes. And then, nurses wheel in a machine, a massive metal cylinder, 7 feet long, weighing over 600 pounds. They slide the child inside, leaving only her head exposed. The machine seals, and with a rhythmic hiss and whoosh, it begins to breathe for her. The iron lung, one of the most important medical devices ever invented, and one of the strangest. It works through negative pressure. The machine creates a vacuum around the patient's chest, forcing the lungs to expand and draw in air. Then it releases the vacuum, and the lungs naturally deflate. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The machine does what the paralyzed muscles can't. For decades, from the 1920s through the 1950s, iron lungs were everywhere in hospitals. During polio epidemics, entire wards were filled with them. Rows and rows of metal cylinders, each containing a child or an adult, each machine breathing with that same mechanical rhythm. Some patients stayed in iron lungs for weeks during the acute phase of polio. Others, those whose paralysis was permanent, stayed for years. Some stayed for the rest of their lives. There are people alive today who've lived in iron lungs for over 60 years, lying on their backs, looking at the world through a mirror angled above their heads, dependent on a machine that's older than most of their doctors. And here's what haunts me. We don't make iron lungs anymore. The last manufacturer stopped production in the 1960s when the polio vaccine made them mostly unnecessary. The few dozen people who still depend on them have to rely on machines built half a century ago, maintained by a dwindling number of technicians who remember how they work. When those machines finally break beyond repair, when the last technician retires, when the last spare part corrodes, what happens to the people inside? Modern ventilators exist, of course. They're smaller, more efficient, easier to use. They work through positive pressure, pushing air into the lungs rather than pulling it in. But some patients can't tolerate positive pressure. Some have lived so long with negative pressure that switching would kill them. For them, the iron lung isn't obsolete. It's irreplaceable. And yet, we stopped making them. We moved on. Progress, right? But sometimes, progress means leaving people behind. People who don't fit the new model, who need the old technology, who become medical orphans when their devices become antiques. This pattern repeats throughout medical history. Devices that were revolutionary, that saved lives by the thousands, and then were abandoned, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. Take phrenology instruments. In the 1800s, phrenology was considered serious science. The idea was simple. Different parts of the brain control different personality traits, and you can read someone's character by measuring the bumps on their skull. Phrenologists created elaborate instruments, calipers, measuring devices, detailed charts mapping destructiveness and amativeness and hope to specific skull regions. It was nonsense, of course, complete pseudoscience. But at the time, it was taught in universities. Presidents and philosophers consulted phrenologists. Marriage counselors used skull measurements to assess compatibility. And then, gradually, as we learned how the brain actually works, phrenology was discredited. The instruments ended up in museums, curiosities from an embarrassing chapter in medical history. We don't mourn that loss. We shouldn't. Phrenology was wrong, and the world is better without it. But here's the uncomfortable question. What are we doing now that future generations will look back on the way we look back on phrenology? What treatments, what devices, what theories seem scientific today but will be laughable in 100 years? It's happened before, more recently than you'd think. Trepanation, drilling holes in the skull, sounds medieval, barbaric. But archaeological evidence shows that ancient peoples practiced it with surprising success. Skulls from 5,000 years ago show trepanation openings with clear signs of healing, meaning the patient survived. In some ancient cultures, survival rates were over 80%, comparable to modern surgery, without anesthesia, without antiseptics, without any understanding of germ theory. How? We still don't fully know, but they did it. They saved lives by drilling into people's heads with flint tools, and most of their patients lived. We lost that knowledge. For centuries, trepanation was considered too dangerous, too primitive. It wasn't until the late 1800s that Western medicine rediscovered controlled skull surgery. We had to relearn what ancient physicians knew instinctively. And then there's radium. In the early 1900s, after Marie Curie discovered radioactivity, radium became a miracle cure, or so people thought. Radium water, radium face cream, radium suppositories. Yes, really. Companies sold radioactive products as health tonics. Perpetual sunshine, the advertisements promised. Energy, vitality, youthful glow. The most famous victim was Eben Byers, a wealthy American industrialist who drank radium water daily for years. He believed it made him feel stronger, more energetic. By 1932, his jaw had literally fallen off. The radium had destroyed his bones from the inside. He died weighing less than 90 pounds, his body riddled with radiation-induced cancers. When they buried him, his coffin was lined with lead because his corpse was too radioactive to handle safely. And yet, for decades, people genuinely believed radium was healthy. Doctors prescribed it, scientists endorsed it. There were radium spas where you could bathe in radioactive water. The radium girls, factory workers who painted watch dials with luminous radium paint, were told to lick their brushes to keep the tips sharp. They died by the dozens, their bones glowing in the dark even after burial. We don't use radium in medicine anymore, obviously. That knowledge, that radium is therapeutic, wasn't just forgotten. It was violently disproven at the cost of hundreds of lives. But here's what keeps me up at night. We didn't stop because we were smart. We stopped because people died so horrifically that we couldn't ignore it anymore. How many died before we admitted we were wrong? And what are we wrong about now? Electrotherapy. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, electricity was the new radium. Doctors used it to treat everything: depression, paralysis, tuberculosis, even baldness. They had devices like the violet ray, which passed high-frequency electrical current through the body. Nikola Tesla himself promoted electrotherapy, demonstrating it at public lectures. Some of it was useful. Electrotherapy evolved into modern techniques like TENS units and ECT. But most of it was quackery, useless, or actively harmful. And yet, for decades, it was mainstream medicine. Then there's bloodletting. We talked about it before, but it's worth emphasizing. For 2,000 years, doctors bled patients as a primary treatment. They had lancets, scarificators, cups specifically designed for drawing blood. Medical textbooks describe the optimal amount to drain based on the patient's condition, age, and constitution. It didn't work. It never worked. In most cases, it made patients worse. George Washington probably would have survived his throat infection if his doctors hadn't drained half his blood. But they believed genuinely that they were helping. And they had instruments, beautiful, precise instruments designed for a procedure that killed people. Do you see the pattern? Medical devices aren't just tools. They're embodiments of our understanding or misunderstanding of the body. And when that understanding changes, the devices become artifacts. remnants of a worldview we've outgrown. But some devices fall into a stranger category. They weren't based on pseudoscience, they actually worked. And we abandoned them anyway, not because they were wrong, but because something else was more convenient. Mercury treatments. For centuries, mercury was the standard cure for syphilis. Doctors had patients inhale mercury vapor, rub mercury ointment on their skin, even inject liquid mercury. The slogan was grim but true. A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. And it worked, sort of. Mercury does kill the bacteria that causes syphilis. The problem is, it also kills the patient, slowly. Mercury poisoning causes tremors, tooth loss, kidney failure, insanity. The phrase mad as a hatter comes from hat makers who used mercury in felt production and suffered neurological damage. But before antibiotics, mercury was the best option available. Doctors knew it was dangerous. They knew patients suffered, but syphilis was worse, so they used it anyway. Then, in 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, and almost overnight, mercury treatments became obsolete. We didn't forget how to use mercury. We chose to stop, because we finally had something better. The mercury itself didn't change. The patient's need didn't change. What changed was our knowledge. And with that knowledge, an entire class of treatments and the devices associated with them vanished. But here's the troubling part. Not every abandoned treatment was replaced with something better. Sometimes we just stopped. Because it was too expensive, too labor-intensive, too politically unpopular. Lobotomy. In 1949, Antonio Egas Moniz won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for developing the lobotomy, a surgical procedure where doctors severed connections in the brain's frontal lobe to treat mental illness. For about 20 years, from the 1940s to the 1960s, lobotomies were performed on tens of thousands of patients worldwide. The procedure was simple, quick, cheap. Some doctors used a tool called a leucotome, a wire loop inserted through a hole drilled in the skull. Others used an even simpler method, an ice pick-like instrument called an orbitoclast, hammered through the thin bone of the eye socket directly into the frontal lobe. The entire operation could be done in 10 minutes, in a doctor's office, with no anesthesia beyond a few electroshock pulses to render the patient unconscious. And it worked, in the sense that it changed behavior. Patients who had been violent became calm. Patients who had been anxious became docile, emotionless. Many lost their personalities entirely, becoming passive shells of who they had been. By the 1960s, as we developed antipsychotic medications and gained a better understanding of mental illness, lobotomies were recognized as barbaric. The procedure stopped. The instruments were retired. Dr. Walter Freeman, the American physician who popularized the transorbital lobotomy, died in obscurity, his legacy in ruins. But here's what haunts historians. Lobotomy wasn't fringe medicine. It was mainstream, respectable, Nobel Prize winning, and thousands of patients were permanently damaged before we admitted it was monstrous. The instruments used for lobotomy still exist in medical museums. They sit in glass cases next to iron lungs and bloodletting kits and radium water bottles. All of them, at one point, represented the cutting edge of medical science. All of them, in hindsight, seem incomprehensible. And that's the lesson, isn't it? That certainty is dangerous. That what seems obvious and scientific and well-proven today might be tomorrow's cautionary tale. We look back at doctors who prescribed radium and think, how could they be so stupid? But they weren't stupid. They were working with the best knowledge available to them. They were trying to help. We're doing the same thing now. Using the best knowledge available, trying to help. And some of what we're doing, some device we trust, some procedure we perform routinely, will be looked back on with horror. The question is, which ones? I don't know. Nobody does. That's what makes it terrifying. But here's what we can do. We can stay humble. We can question. We can remember that every generation thinks it's reached the pinnacle of knowledge and every generation is eventually proven wrong. The iron lung saved thousands of lives. The lobotomy destroyed thousands. Both were cutting-edge medicine. Both were performed by skilled, well-intentioned doctors. The difference wasn't intelligence or morality. It was knowledge that came too late for the people who needed it most. So, maybe the lesson isn't just about devices. Maybe it's about certainty. About remembering that medicine, all science really, is a process of becoming less wrong over time. We're never right, we're just less wrong than we were yesterday. And the devices we abandon along the way, the iron lungs, the bloodletting kits, the lobotomy picks, they're not just artifacts, they're reminders, monuments to our mistakes and our progress, inseparable from each other. Because progress isn't clean, it's messy, uncomfortable, sometimes horrifying. And every step forward requires leaving something behind. The question is, are we leaving behind the right things? But medical devices are just one kind of machine that vanished. There are others, bigger, stranger, more ambitious. Machines that didn't just save individuals, but tried to change entire industries. But those individual geniuses didn't work in isolation. They were part of something larger, entire industries, entire ways of thinking that once hummed with life and purpose. Factories that employed thousands. Technologies so ubiquitous they seemed permanent. And then, obsolete. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine walking into a New York City office building in 1890. You're on the ground floor, and you need to send a document to the 14th floor. You don't use email. That won't exist for another century. You don't send a messenger. Too slow, too unreliable. Instead, you walk to a small brass tube mounted on the wall, place your document in a cylindrical canister, load it into the tube, and pull a lever. Whoosh! The canister disappears, sucked upward through a network of pipes by compressed air and vacuum pressure. 30 seconds later, it arrives on the 14th floor, rattling into a receiving bin. Your document has traveled faster than any human could carry it, without a single person touching it along the way. This was pneumatic tube technology, and for nearly 100 years, it was everywhere. Not just in buildings, but beneath entire cities. Paris had over 280 miles of pneumatic tubes crisscrossing underground, connecting post offices, government buildings, newspapers. You could send a message from one side of the city to the other in minutes. New York had a similar system. So did London, Berlin, Prague. The tubes carried telegrams, stock market updates, pharmacy prescriptions, even, in some experimental systems, money and small packages. During World War I, they carried military orders that couldn't risk radio interception. During the 1920s, newspapers used them to get breaking news from reporters in the field to editors at headquarters faster than any phone call could manage. It was the internet before the internet, a physical network connecting people across distances, making communication instantaneous in ways that felt like magic. And then it just stopped. The decline wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment when someone turned off all the pneumatic tubes. It was gradual. First, the telephone became cheap enough for everyone. Then, fax machines. Then, email. Each new technology made the tubes a little less necessary. Maintaining them became expensive. All those miles of pipe underground. All those vacuum pumps running constantly. One by one, cities shut down their systems. By the 1960s, most were gone. By the 2000s, they were curiosities. Today, you can still find pneumatic tubes in some hospitals, sending blood samples between labs or medication between floors. But the vast citywide networks, the ones that once moved millions of messages every day, are buried and forgotten. Except in Prague. In Prague, they kept theirs running. Even now, in 2025, you can still send a letter through Prague's pneumatic tube system, called Pražská pneumatická pošta. It's smaller than it used to be, and it's mostly for novelty, but it works. The engineers who maintain it are some of the last people on Earth who understand the mechanics. the precise balance of air pressure and valve timing that makes the whole thing function. When those engineers retire, that knowledge might go with them. And here's what fascinates me. Pneumatic tubes were objectively brilliant. They were fast, reliable, secure. You couldn't hack into a physical tube the way you can hack into an email server. They required no electricity once the air pressure was established, making them more resilient than digital systems during power outages. They were elegant, in the way old mechanical systems often are. Entirely visible, entirely understandable. You could see the canister moving through a clear tube and know exactly where your message was. But we traded all that for something faster, cheaper, more scalable, and we don't regret it exactly. Email is undeniably more convenient, but we did lose something. We lost the physical satisfaction of sending a message, the tactile click of loading the canister, the whoosh of compressed air. We lost the reliability. Emails get lost in spam folders, but pneumatic canisters either arrived or they didn't, and you knew immediately. We lost the simplicity, a system any mechanic could fix versus one that requires an IT degree. Progress isn't always a straight upgrade. Sometimes it's a trade. We gain convenience and lose craftsmanship. We gain speed and lose certainty. We gain scale and lose intimacy. Do you ever feel that way about technology? Like we're moving so fast, we don't have time to ask if we're moving in the right direction? Let me take you somewhere colder, much colder. It's 1805, and you're standing on the frozen surface of Walden Pond in Massachusetts. Around you, dozens of men are sawing through ice. Not thin ice, but thick blocks, 2 feet deep, crystal clear and dense. They work in teams, cutting the ice into perfect rectangles, hauling them out with tongs and loading them onto horse-drawn sleds. By the end of winter, they'll have harvested tens of thousands of tons of ice from this single pond. And then they'll ship it, not just to Boston, but to New York, to Charleston, to Cuba, to India, to Australia. Ice from a Massachusetts pond will travel halfway around the world, packed in sawdust and insulated in the hulls of clipper ships, and arrive months later, still frozen solid. This was the ice trade, and for nearly a century, it was one of the most profitable industries in America. A man named Frederick Tudor, known as the Ice King, built an empire on it. He figured out how to cut, store, and transport ice so efficiently that he could sell it in tropical climates for less than it cost locals to make it themselves. By the 1850s, he was shipping 150,000 tons of ice per year, and people in Calcutta were drinking iced beverages in 100-degree heat thanks to ice cut from frozen New England lakes. Think about that for a moment. Before refrigeration, before freezers, before any kind of mechanical cooling, humans figured out how to move winter itself across the planet. They turned cold into a commodity. They made summer optional. But then, in the 1870s and 1880s, something changed. Engineers developed the first mechanical refrigeration systems, machines that could make ice artificially, year-round, anywhere in the world. At first, they were expensive and unreliable, but they improved quickly. By 1900, they were cheaper than natural ice. By 1920, the ice trade was dead. All those ice houses, massive insulated warehouses that dotted the shores of every northern lake, were abandoned. The saws, the tongs, the specialized ships with their double holes and sawdust insulation, obsolete. Entire towns that had built their economies around harvesting and storing ice simply moved on, and the knowledge went with them. How do you cut ice efficiently without modern tools? How do you pack it so it lasts 6 months in a ship's hold? What's the optimal thickness for transport versus storage? These were sciences, worked out through generations of trial and error, and now they exist only in historical archives. There's a certain irony to this, isn't there? We built machines to give us ice whenever we wanted it, and in doing so, we forgot how to work with ice on its own terms. We gained control and lost relationship. We can make ice now, but we've forgotten how to harvest it, how to respect it, how to move it across oceans using nothing but sawdust and intuition. And it's not just ice. This pattern repeats over and over throughout the Industrial Revolution. Old skills, old industries, old ways of doing things, rendered obsolete not because they didn't work, but because something else worked faster. Take player pianos. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, before recorded music, before radio, if you wanted to hear music in your home, someone had to play it. But not everyone could play piano, so inventors created the player piano, a piano that played itself using perforated rolls of paper. Punch holes in the paper in the right pattern, and the piano would play any song you wanted, perfectly every time. It was the first mass-produced music automation, the first way to experience a performance without the performer being present. And it was wildly popular. By 1919, over half of all pianos sold in America were player pianos. But then came the phonograph, then the radio, then recorded music that didn't require a 2,000-pound instrument in your living room. By 1930, player piano sales had collapsed. By 1940, most manufacturers had gone out of business, and with them went an entire art form. Creating a player piano roll wasn't just about transcribing notes. It was about encoding expression, how hard to strike each key, how long to hold each note, the subtle rubato and dynamics that make music feel alive. The best roll arrangers were artists in their own right, translating human performance into patterns of wholes with such skill that listeners couldn't tell the difference. That skill is almost entirely lost now. There are a few hobbyists who still make rolls, a few technicians who can repair old player pianos, but the vast infrastructure, the factories, the arrangers, the distribution networks is gone. We have Spotify now, we have YouTube, we can hear any song ever recorded instantly anywhere, and yet, there was something magical about a piano playing itself, wasn't there? Something uncanny and wonderful about watching the keys move on their own. Seeing the mechanics of music made visible. Here's what I think about late at night. How many technologies have we abandoned that we might actually need again someday? Pneumatic tubes, for instance. In an age of cyber attacks and digital surveillance, wouldn't a physical messaging system, unhackable, untraceable, be valuable? In a time of power grid vulnerabilities, wouldn't mechanical systems that don't require electricity be worth preserving? The ice trade taught us how to move temperature-sensitive goods across vast distances without refrigeration. That knowledge seems quaint now, but what happens if fuel becomes scarce? If electricity becomes unreliable? Suddenly, knowing how to pack things in sawdust and natural ice doesn't seem so obsolete. I'm not saying we should go back. I'm not romanticizing the past. Those old industries were hard, dangerous, often exploitative. But I am saying we should remember. We should document. We should keep at least a few people alive who know how these things worked, just in case. Because history has shown us, over and over, that progress isn't permanent. Civilizations rise and fall. Technologies that seem invincible today can vanish tomorrow. And when they do, the people who remember the old ways, the primitive ways, are suddenly the most valuable people in the room. Let me tell you about one more lost industry, one that feels almost mythical now. In the early 1900s, the future of air travel wasn't airplanes. It was dirigibles, massive airships, lighter than air, powered by engines and steered by rudders. The most famous were the German Zeppelins, named after Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, who pioneered their design. These weren't small. The Hindenburg, the largest and most luxurious dirigible ever built, was 804 feet long, longer than 3 Boeing 747s parked end to end. It could carry 70 passengers in staterooms that rivaled the finest hotels. There was a dining room with linen tablecloths and china, a lounge with a grand piano, a smoking room, yes, a smoking room on a hydrogen-filled airship, sealed behind double doors with an electric airlock to prevent sparks. Flying on a Zeppelin was nothing like flying on an airplane. It was silent, smooth, almost dreamlike. You could walk to the windows and look down at the earth, passing slowly beneath you. No turbulence, no engine roar, just the quiet hum of wind over fabric and the occasional thrum of the engines adjusting course. And they could go anywhere. Zeppelins crossed the Atlantic regularly, Germany to New Jersey in 2.5 days, faster than any ocean liner. They flew over the North Pole. They circumnavigated the globe. For a brief moment in the 1930s, it seemed like dirigibles would be the future of international travel, and then, on May 6, 1937, the Hindenburg caught fire while landing in New Jersey. 37 seconds. That's how long it took for the largest aircraft in the world to burn and collapse. 36 people died, and with them died the dirigible industry. It wasn't entirely rational. The Hindenburg disaster was tragic, but statistically, dirigibles were quite safe, safer in many ways than early airplanes. The problem was hydrogen, which is flammable. If the Hindenburg had been filled with helium, which is inert, non-flammable, it likely would never have caught fire. But helium was rare and expensive, controlled almost entirely by the United States, which refused to sell it to Nazi Germany for political reasons. So, they used hydrogen, and paid the price. After 1937, no one wanted to fly in an airship. The industry collapsed overnight. The infrastructure, the massive hangars, the hydrogen production facilities, the trained crews who understood the complex aerodynamics of lighter-than-air flight, was abandoned or repurposed. And with it went a dream. The dream of slow, luxurious, silent travel. Of floating above the earth rather than punching through it at 500 miles per hour. We chose speed over grace, efficiency over experience. And I'm not saying we were wrong. Airplanes are faster, cheaper, more practical. But we lost something, didn't we? We lost the poetry of it. Sometimes I imagine an alternate history, one where the Hindenburg was filled with helium, where it landed safely, where dirigibles became the dominant form of long-distance travel. What would that world look like? Quieter, certainly, slower, maybe more thoughtful, maybe kinder to the environment. Modern dirigible designs are far more fuel efficient than jets, but we'll never know. That timeline ended in 37 seconds of fire, and here's the pattern I keep seeing. We don't just lose technologies. We lose possibilities. We lose alternate futures. Every time an industry collapses, every time a technique is forgotten, we close a door. And sometimes, decades later, we realize we might have needed what was behind that door. The ice harvesters knew how to work with cold using nothing but natural resources. The pneumatic tube engineers knew how to move information securely without electricity. The Zeppelin designers knew how to build aircraft that were gentle, quiet, efficient in ways we're only now beginning to appreciate. These weren't primitive people. They were innovators, problem solvers, visionaries. They built systems that worked, that lasted, that served millions of people, and we forgot them because something newer came along. But newer isn't always better. Sometimes it's just newer. And sometimes, late at night, when the power flickers or the internet goes down or the news talks about another ransomware attack, I think about those old systems, the mechanical ones, the physical ones, the ones that didn't need passwords or updates or troubleshooting, the ones that just worked. Because here's what history teaches us. Nothing lasts forever. Not empires, not technologies, not even the confidence that we'll always have electricity and running water and instant communication. Civilizations that thought they were invincible have crumbled. Cities that seemed eternal have turned to dust. And when things fall apart, when the complex systems we depend on start to fail, the people who remember the simple systems, the old systems, the obsolete systems, they're the ones who survive. Maybe that's melodramatic. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic, but I don't think it's unreasonable to ask, what are we losing right now that we might desperately need later? What skills, what knowledge, What elegant solutions are we letting slip away because we're too busy chasing the next new thing? And more importantly, who's going to remember? Who's going to be the last person alive who knows how to cut ice from a frozen pond, or maintain a pneumatic tube system, or navigate by reading the waves? Because sometimes people don't just fade into footnotes. Sometimes they vanish entirely, leaving nothing behind but questions. So, we've talked about lost inventions, forgotten geniuses whose names were erased. But there's another kind of disappearance that haunts us differently. Not the slow fade of being forgotten, but the sudden, inexplicable absence. People who were here one moment, alive, working, creating, and then simply gone. No body, no explanation, just silence where a person used to be. Let me tell you about Amelia Earhart. You probably know the name, even if you don't know the full story. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean in 1932, completing the journey in just under 15 hours. She set speed records, altitude records, distance records. She wrote best-selling books about aviation. She was famous, beloved, a symbol of courage and possibility in an era when women were told what they couldn't do. And then, on July 2nd, 1937, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, her plane vanished. She was attempting to fly around the world at the equator, a route no one had ever completed. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, had made it most of the way. They'd crossed South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia. They were on one of the final legs, flying from Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island, a tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific. The distance was 2,500 miles, most of it over open ocean with no landmarks. The U.S. Coast Guard had positioned a ship near Howland Island to help guide them in by radio. For hours, the ship received transmissions from Amelia. Her voice was calm, professional, reporting her position and asking for bearings. But the signals were weak, scratchy, hard to triangulate. And then, at 8:43 a.m., a final transmission. "We are running north and south." And then, nothing. They searched for weeks, ships, planes, entire fleets combing thousands of square miles of ocean. They found nothing. Not a piece of wreckage, not a life raft, not a single trace. In the 88 years since, the theories have multiplied. Maybe she crashed into the ocean and sank immediately. Maybe she landed on a remote island, Gardner Island, now called Nikumaroro, and survived for days or weeks before dying. Maybe she was captured by the Japanese military, who were expanding their presence in the Pacific. Maybe she was on a secret spy mission for the US government. There's evidence for some of these theories. In 1940, British colonists found human bones on Nikumaroro, along with remnants of a campfire, a woman's shoe, and a box that once contained a navigational instrument. The bones were lost, but forensic analysis of the measurements suggests they could have been Amelia's. Sonar surveys have detected what might be aircraft wreckage on the ocean floor near Howland Island. Declassified military documents hint at cover-ups and classified missions. But none of it is conclusive. None of it brings her back or tells us definitively what happened in those final moments. And here's what gets me about Amelia's disappearance. It wasn't random. It wasn't like she wandered off into the wilderness alone. She was flying a state-of-the-art plane, equipped with the best navigation tools of the era. She was in radio contact with a ship specifically positioned to help her. There were people listening, waiting, ready to assist, and still, she vanished. It reminds us how vast the world still is, how easy it is even now to simply disappear, to slip between the cracks of communication and surveillance, to become a ghost. But Amelia's story, at least, is famous. People remember her. They search for her. Her name is in history books. Not everyone gets that. Let me tell you about Louis Le Prince. In 1888, he invented the motion picture camera, not a prototype, not a theoretical device, but a working camera that could capture moving images on film. He shot the first films ever made, his family walking in a garden, traffic crossing a bridge in Leeds, England. These aren't reconstructions or claims. The films still exist. You can watch them online right now, grainy and silent, but unmistakably real. This was 2 years before Thomas Edison's first motion picture experiments. 2 years before the Lumiere brothers in France. Louis Le Prince got there first. And then, on September 16, 1890, he boarded a train in Dijon, France, heading to Paris. He was planning to travel to New York to unveil his invention publicly, to secure patents, to claim his place in history. His luggage was loaded onto the train. Witnesses saw him board. The train departed. When it arrived in Paris, Louis Le Prince was gone. His luggage was still there, untouched, but he wasn't. The train was searched. The route was retraced. Police questioned every passenger, every conductor, every station attendant along the line. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard a struggle. It was as if he'd evaporated mid-journey. His family searched for years. His wife, Lizzie, fought legal battles with Edison, who claimed to have invented the motion picture camera first and sued anyone who said otherwise. Lizzie insisted her husband had done it first, showed the films as proof, begged the courts to recognize Louis's work. But without Louis himself, without his testimony, his presence, the court sided with Edison. Edison became the father of cinema. Louis Le Prince became a footnote, a mysterious disappearance, a what if. And the theories, oh, the theories. Some say he was killed by Edison's agents to eliminate a competitor. Some say he committed suicide, overwhelmed by financial troubles and the stress of the upcoming demonstrations. Some say he staged his own disappearance to escape debts or a scandal. In 2008, a photograph was discovered showing a drowned man pulled from the Seine River. In 1890, the timing and appearance match. But it's not conclusive. We'll never know. The man who invented cinema disappeared like a character in a film, leaving only shadows and questions. Do you see the pattern? These aren't just disappearances, they're erasures. Moments where history could have gone one way, where Amelia completes her flight and becomes the most famous aviator in history, where Louis patents his camera and we call him the father of cinema. But instead, the person vanishes and history pivots. And sometimes the disappearance is so complete, so baffling, that it becomes almost supernatural. Jim Thompson was an American businessman who moved to Thailand after World War II and almost single-handedly revived the Thai silk industry. He was colorful, charming, impossible to ignore. A former OSS officer who spoke fluent Thai, collected Southeast Asian art, lived in a traditional Thai house filled with antiques. By the 1960s, he was a millionaire, famous throughout Asia, a fixture of Bangkok high society. On March 26, 1967, he went for a walk in the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia, a popular vacation spot with cool temperatures and lush jungle. He was staying with friends in a cottage. After lunch, he told them he was going for a short stroll on a marked trail. He was 61 years old, healthy, experienced in tropical climates. He never came back. The search was massive. Police, military, local tribes, even psychics and shamans combed the jungle for weeks. They found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle or an accident. It's as if he walked 5 steps into the jungle and ceased to exist. The theories are endless. He was kidnapped by communist insurgents who were active in the area. He was killed by business rivals. He was still working for the CIA and staged his disappearance. He had a heart attack and was eaten by animals. He fell into a hidden cave or ravine. But here's what haunts investigators. The Cameron Highlands weren't remote wilderness. They were a popular tourist area with well-maintained trails. Jim disappeared in broad daylight, on a path that dozens of people walked every day. And no one saw anything. No one heard anything. He just vanished. His disappearance is still considered one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. And then there's Glenn Miller, the famous big band leader one of the most popular musicians of the 1940s. In December 1944, he was flying from England to France to perform for Allied troops. His plane took off in bad weather and was never seen again. No wreckage, no distress signal, no bodies. For decades, the official story was that the plane crashed into the English Channel due to bad weather or mechanical failure. But in the 1980s, a navigator from a British bomber squadron came forward with a different story. He claimed that his squadron had been returning from an aborted mission and jettisoned their unused bombs over the channel, standard procedure. He checked his logbook and realized the time and location matched Glenn Miller's flight path. He believes, with increasing certainty, that they accidentally bombed Glenn Miller's plane. If true, it's a tragedy of friendly fire and terrible coincidence. But we'll never know for sure. The plane is somewhere at the bottom of the channel, buried under decades of silt, impossible to locate. These stories share something. They're not just about people dying. Death, sadly, is common and understandable. They're about people disappearing without explanation, without closure. They're about the moment when someone crosses from the known into the unknown and never comes back. And what makes it worse is that these weren't nobodies. They were accomplished, visible, connected people. Amelia Earhart was famous. Louis LaPrince had patents and business partners. Jim Thompson had friends and employees and a multi-million-dollar company. Glenn Miller was performing for armies. If people like that can vanish without a trace, what does that say about the rest of us? There's a physicist named Ettore Majorana who disappeared in 1938. He was one of the brightest minds in quantum mechanics, a colleague of Enrico Fermi, one of the physicists working on the theories that would lead to nuclear fission. He was only 31 years old, but already legendary for his intuition and mathematical ability. On March 25, 1938, he withdrew all his money from the bank, bought a ticket on a boat from Palermo to Naples, and was seen boarding. The boat arrived in Naples. Ettore didn't. Some say he committed suicide. He'd been depressed, wrote letters that sounded like goodbyes, but no body was ever found. Some say he fled to a monastery, overwhelmed by the moral implications of nuclear weapons. Some say he defected to Argentina or the Soviet Union, taking his knowledge with him. In 2011, a witness came forward claiming to have seen Ettore alive in Venezuela in the 1950s, working under an assumed name. Italy's government officially declared him dead in 1975, but then, in 2015, reopened the investigation based on new testimony. The case is still, technically, unsolved. Here's what keeps me awake. Ettore Majorana knew things. He understood nuclear physics at a level few people in the world could match. If he disappeared deliberately, if he chose to vanish, what did he know that made him want to erase himself from history? And if he was killed or kidnapped, who wanted him gone, and why? Sometimes disappearances aren't accidents. Sometimes they're deliberate. Someone knows something they shouldn't, or is working on something too valuable, or is simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And powerful people decide it's easier if that person just isn't there anymore. I'm not saying every disappearance is a conspiracy. Most aren't. Most are sad, simple tragedies, accidents, misjudgments, bad luck. But some make you wonder. Frederick Valentich was a pilot in Australia. On October 21, 1978, he was flying a small plane from Melbourne to King Island, a routine training flight in good weather. At 7:06 p.m., he radioed air traffic control. His voice was calm, but confused. "There's an aircraft near me. It's got a green light and it's metallic. It's shiny. It's not an aircraft." The controller asked him to describe it. Frederick said it was large, moving erratically, sometimes hovering above him. He said it wasn't an aircraft. He kept repeating that. "It's not an aircraft." At 7:12 p.m., his final transmission. "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." And then a metallic scraping sound, and then silence. He was never seen again. No wreckage, no body, no explanation. The official investigation concluded that he probably became disoriented and crashed into the ocean. But that doesn't explain the radio transmissions, the detailed description of something that wasn't an aircraft, the metallic sound at the end. Was it a UFO? A secret military craft? A hallucination caused by hypoxia? We don't know. We'll never know. But Frederick Valentich's last words, "It's not an aircraft," hang in the air like a question we can't answer. Here's what all these stories teach us. The world is bigger and stranger than we think. We live in an age of GPS and cell towers and satellites that can read a license plate from space. We assume nothing can truly vanish anymore, but people still do. Ships still do. Planes still do. Malaysia Airlines. Flight 370 disappeared in 2014. A modern airliner with 239 people on board, equipped with every tracking technology we have, and it vanished over the Indian Ocean. Despite years of searching, only a few pieces of wreckage have ever been found. How? How does a Boeing 777 disappear in 2014? The same way Amelia Earhart disappeared in 1937. The same way Louis Le Prince disappeared in 1890. The world has edges and cracks and dark spaces where things slip through. And maybe that's terrifying. Or maybe, and this is how I try to think about it on quiet nights, maybe it's a reminder that for all our technology, for all our surveillance and satellites and algorithms, there are still mysteries. There are still questions we can't answer. There are still places the light doesn't reach. We don't know everything. We can't control everything. And some things, some people, will always remain just out of reach, existing only in stories and speculation and the ache of wondering what happened. Amelia Earhart is out there somewhere, maybe at the bottom of the Pacific, maybe on an island, her bones long since scattered by time and weather. But somewhere, she exists, even if we'll never find her. Louis Le Prince got on a train. Somewhere between Dijon and Paris, something happened. Something we'll never understand. Jim Thompson walked into the jungle, and the jungle kept him. These aren't just stories of loss. They're stories of the limits of knowledge, of the boundaries of what we can recover, what we can solve, what we can bring back from the dark. And in a strange way, that's okay. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Not every disappearance needs a neat explanation. Sometimes the not knowing is part of what makes us human. The ability to sit with uncertainty, to honor the missing without needing to fix them. But there are other mysteries we can solve. Objects that exist, that we can touch and study and try to understand, even if the people who made them are long gone. Which brings us to the things that remain. The objects that outlive their creators, sitting in glass cases in storage rooms, waiting for someone smart enough to understand them. Sometimes these artifacts are so strange, so impossible for their time, that they feel less like history and more like messages from a civilization we never knew existed. Let me show you what I mean. In 1936, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König was cataloging artifacts in the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad. Most of what he handled was familiar: pottery shards, clay tablets, the usual fragments of ancient Mesopotamian life. But then he opened a box containing something that made him stop. It was a clay jar, about 5 inches tall, dating from around 250 BC. Inside the jar was a copper cylinder. Inside that cylinder was an iron rod, corroded by time but still intact. The jar had once been filled with some kind of liquid. Analysis of residue suggested vinegar or wine. Wilhelm looked at this arrangement: jar, liquid, 2 different metals, and had a wild thought. This is a battery, not metaphorically, not symbolically, a literal galvanic cell capable of generating electrical current. The Baghdad battery, as it came to be called, shouldn't exist. The ancient Parthians who made it weren't supposed to understand electricity. That knowledge wouldn't be discovered until Alessandro Volta created the first battery in 1800 AD, 2,000 years later. And yet, there it was. When modern researchers built replicas and filled them with vinegar, they generated about 1.1 volts of electricity, enough to power a small light, or electroplate jewelry, which might explain why some ancient gold-plated objects show evidence of plating techniques we can't otherwise account for. But here's where the story gets complicated. We don't actually know if the Baghdad battery was a battery. We know it could function as one, but that doesn't prove it was designed as one. Maybe it was a scroll container. Maybe it was for storing sacred documents. Maybe the electrical generation was accidental, a side effect no one noticed or cared about. The person who made it is gone. The culture that used it left no written explanation. All we have is the object itself, sitting silent in a museum, refusing to tell us its purpose. And that's the haunting part. We can hold these things, study them, test them, but we can't make them speak. They're answers to questions we don't know how to ask. The Voynich manuscript is another example, perhaps the most famous unsolved mystery in the history of linguistics. It's a book, a real physical book, carbon dated to the early 15th century, about 240 pages long, filled with writing and illustrations. But the writing is in a language or code that no one has ever deciphered. Not linguists, not cryptographers, not artificial intelligence algorithms. The text has been analyzed by some of the brightest minds in history, including World War II codebreakers who cracked Nazi Enigma messages. None of them succeeded. The illustrations are just as baffling. There are drawings of plants that don't match any known species, flowers with impossible petal arrangements, roots that spiral in ways real roots don't. There are diagrams of naked women bathing in green liquid that flows through interconnected tubes. There are astrological charts with symbols that don't match any tradition we recognize. There are maps of something. Cities, biological systems, no one knows. Every few years, someone announces they've cracked it. In 2017, a researcher claimed it was written in Hebrew with vowels removed. In 2019, another claimed it was an early form of Turkish. In 2021, someone else insisted it was a medical text in Romance language using abbreviations. None of these theories have held up. The manuscript remains unread, its author unknown, its purpose obscure. And here's what keeps scholars obsessed. The manuscript isn't random. Statistical analysis shows clear patterns in the text, repeated words, consistent structure, grammatical rules. It's not gibberish. It means something. Someone, 600 years ago, spent months or years carefully writing and illustrating this book they had knowledge they wanted to preserve. And then, silence. The book was passed through centuries of collectors, none of whom could read it, until it ended up in Yale University's Beinecke Library, where it sits today. Beautiful, intricate, meaningless to us, or maybe not meaningless. Maybe we just haven't learned its language yet. There's a category of artifacts archaeologists call ooparts, out-of-place artifacts. Objects that seem too advanced, too sophisticated, too impossible for the time and place where they were found. Take the Dropa stones, discovered in 1938 in caves on the border between China and Tibet. They're stone discs, about 9 inches in diameter, with spiral grooves carved into them, like ancient records. The grooves allegedly contain writing in a language no one recognizes. Some researchers claim the text tells the story of a spacecraft that crashed in the mountains 12,000 years ago, and survivors who integrated with local tribes. Or take the Kozo artifact, found in California in 1961 inside a geode that was at least 500,000 years old. When the geode was cut open, inside was what looked like a spark plug, complete with a ceramic core, metal terminals, and hexagonal casing. In a rock 500,000 years old. The problem with ooparts is that most turn out to have mundane explanations. The Dropa stones are probably just decorative discs. They're writing natural weathering patterns. The Koso artifact was likely a 1920s spark plug that got encased in fast-forming mineral deposits, not ancient rock. But the fact that we keep finding these objects, that we keep hoping they're proof of lost civilizations or advanced ancient technology, tells us something about ourselves. We want history to be stranger than it is. We want proof that we're not the first, that others came before us and achieved things we can't yet understand. And sometimes the artifacts really are that strange. The theremin is a musical instrument invented in 1920 by Russian physicist Leon Theremin. You play it without touching it. You wave your hands near two antennas, and it produces eerie, otherworldly sounds. It works through electromagnetic fields, detecting the position of your hands and converting that to pitch and volume. It's not a mystery exactly, we know how it works, but what's bizarre is how quickly it was forgotten. In the 1930s and 40s, theremins were everywhere, in movie soundtracks, classical compositions, even popular music. Clara Rockmore, a virtuoso thereminist, performed in concert halls worldwide. The instrument seemed poised to become a permanent part of music, and then it just faded. By the 1960s, almost no one was making theremins. The few that existed sat in museums or private collections, gathering dust. It wasn't until the 1990s, when vintage electronic music had a resurgence, that people rediscovered the theremin. But here's what haunts me. Leon Theremin himself disappeared. In 1938, he was kidnapped by Soviet agents while living in New York and forcibly returned to Russia, where he was imprisoned in a labor camp and forced to work on surveillance technology for the KGB. He wasn't released until 1947, and even then, he lived under constant watch. The West assumed he had died. His instrument, his legacy, nearly died with him. He resurfaced briefly in the 1990s, met with Clara Rockmore one last time, and died in 1993 at the age of 97. By then, his instrument was a curiosity, a weird footnote in music history. The theremin is still with us, but barely. It's a ghost of what it could have been. An entire musical tradition cut short by politics, by kidnapping, by the simple cruelty of a man being erased from his own creation. And that pattern repeats. Instruments, technologies, entire art forms nearly lost, because the people who understood them were silenced. The onde de Martenot is another example, an electronic instrument invented in 1928 by Maurice Martenot, capable of producing sounds no other instrument could. Composers like Olivier Messiaen wrote entire symphonies for it. But Martenot died in 1980, and with him went much of the knowledge of how to build and maintain the instrument. Today there are only a handful of Ondes Martenot players left in the world, and maybe 100 working instruments. When those players die, when those instruments break beyond repair, an entire sonic landscape will vanish. We're losing sounds, actual sounds, vibrations in air that will never be heard again once the last instrument stops working. Do you ever think about that? About the songs your grandparents heard that no recording captured? The sounds of extinct animals, extinct languages, extinct machines? Every generation loses a little more of the soundscape of history, and we don't even notice until it's too late. But let's go back further, much further. Stonehenge. You know it. The massive stone circle in England, built around 2500 BC. We know roughly how it was constructed. Massive stones dragged from quarries hundreds of miles away, positioned with astronomical precision. But we don't know why. Was it a temple, a burial site, an astronomical calendar, a healing center? Some of the stones contain high levels of minerals thought to have medicinal properties in ancient times. All of the above. The people who built it left no written records. The Druids who later used it didn't build it. They arrived thousands of years after its construction. All we have are the stones themselves, silent and massive, aligned to the summer solstice sunrise in a way that can't be accidental. And here's what makes Stonehenge especially haunting. It's not unique. There are stone circles all over the British Isles, all over Europe. Some are larger, some more precisely aligned. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is even older, 11,000 years old, built by people who supposedly hadn't invented agriculture yet, hadn't formed complex societies yet. And yet, there it is. Massive carved pillars arranged in circles, covered in intricate animal reliefs, clearly the product of organized, purposeful effort. How? Why? The people who built these monuments had the same brains we do, the same capacity for thought and planning. But their priorities, their worldview, their reasons for spending decades hauling multi-ton stones, we can't access that. We've lost the context. We stand in front of these monuments like children in front of adults, unable to understand the conversation. And sometimes, the loss is even more complete. Sometimes we lose entire systems of thought. Linear A is an ancient writing system used by the Minoan civilization on Crete around 1800 BC. We have hundreds of tablets written in Linear A. We can see that it's a real language. It has grammar, consistent symbols, clear structure, but we can't read it. No Rosetta Stone exists, no bilingual text to give us a key. The related script, Linear B, was deciphered in 1952. It turned out to be an early form of Greek, but Linear A is older, different, and so far unbreakable, which means an entire civilization's literature, laws, religious texts, history, gone. Not destroyed, but unreadable, which is almost worse. The words are right there, preserved perfectly in clay. We just can't hear them. Rongo Rongo is another example. A writing system from Easter Island found carved on wooden tablets. Only 26 tablets survive, and no one alive can read them. The last person who could read Rongo Rongo died in the 1860s, and all attempts to decipher it have failed. Imagine that. An entire written language, unique to one island, containing who knows what knowledge about navigation, astronomy, mythology, daily life. And it's gone. Not because the tablets were destroyed, but because we forgot how to read them. The tablets sit in museums, mute, patient, holding secrets we may never unlock. And here's the cruel irony. We did this to ourselves. When European missionaries arrived on Easter Island, they saw the tablets and declared them pagan and demonic. They burned most of them. The survivors were collected as curiosities, shipped to museums, studied by people who had no context, no teachers, no way to learn what they said. We destroyed the key, and then spent a century trying to pick the lock. How many other writing systems have we lost? How many languages died with their last speaker, taking entire ways of understanding the world with them? Linguists estimate that a language dies every 2 weeks. Every 14 days, the last fluent speaker of some tongue passes away. And with them goes a vocabulary, a grammar, a set of concepts that can't quite be translated into any other language. We're losing ways of thinking, not just words, but frameworks, entire philosophies encoded in syntax and metaphor. And once they're gone, we can't get them back. We can't reverse engineer a worldview from nothing. But here's what gives me hope. Sometimes, rarely, we do crack the code. Sometimes, after decades or centuries, someone finds the key. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs were unreadable for over 1,000 years after the last person who could read them died. Egypt was conquered by Greeks, then Romans, then Arabs. The knowledge was lost. The pyramids stood, covered in writing, and no one knew what they said. Until 1799, when French soldiers in Egypt found the Rosetta Stone, a decree written in 3 languages, hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and ancient Greek. Scholars could read the Greek, which gave them a foothold. Jean-François Champollion spent 20 years comparing the texts, testing theories, and in 1822, he finally cracked it. Suddenly, 3,000 years of Egyptian history became readable. Temples, tombs, papyrus scrolls, everything opened up. We heard voices from the dead, speaking clearly again after millennia of silence. The same thing happened with cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing of ancient Mesopotamia, lost for 2,000 years, deciphered in the 1850s, and suddenly we had the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Hammurabi, astronomical records from Babylon. These weren't primitive people scrawling crude symbols. They were writing literature, law, science, poetry. They were us, just wearing different clothes and speaking different languages. And they left messages. They wanted to be remembered. Every tablet, every inscription, every carefully carved hieroglyph is someone saying, I was here, I lived, I thought, I mattered. The artifacts in museums aren't just objects, they're voices, frozen in clay and stone and metal, waiting for someone to learn their language. And maybe that's the lesson, that nothing is truly lost as long as the artifact survives. Knowledge can be forgotten, techniques can vanish, names can be erased. But objects endure, they wait. And someday, if we're patient and clever and humble enough to listen, they speak again. The Baghdad battery might tell us that ancient people understood electricity. The Voynich manuscript might hold medical knowledge we've forgotten. The stone circles might teach us how to think in astronomical time, in generations and centuries instead of days and quarters. Or maybe they won't. Maybe some mysteries stay mysterious, no matter how hard we search. But that's okay too, because the searching matters, the wondering matters. The refusal to accept that history is settled, that we know everything worth knowing, that matters most of all. These artifacts are proof that we've forgotten more than we remember. And maybe, just maybe, some of what we've forgotten is exactly what we need to remember now. So, we've wandered through all these losses, techniques forgotten, people disappeared, artifacts speaking in languages we can't understand. And maybe you're feeling what I feel sometimes, late at night when these stories pile up. A kind of grief. A mourning for everything humanity has let slip away. But here's the question that keeps circling back. Why? Why do we lose things? And more importantly, what does the losing teach us? Because it's not random, this pattern of forgetting. There are reasons, sometimes clear, sometimes hidden, why certain knowledge survives and other knowledge dies. And understanding those reasons might be the most important thing we can do. Let me start with something uncomfortable. Sometimes we lose things because we choose to. Think about bloodletting, the medical practice of deliberately draining blood from patients to treat illness. For nearly 2,000 years, it was the most common medical procedure in the Western world. Fever, bloodletting. Infection, bloodletting. Headache, depression, indigestion, bloodletting, bloodletting, bloodletting. Doctors had elaborate theories about balancing the humors and releasing bad blood. They had specialized tools, lancets, scarificators, cups for collecting blood. There were entire guilds of professional bloodletters. The barber's pole, red and white stripes, is actually a symbol of bloodletting, red for blood, white for bandages. And it killed people, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. George Washington, for instance, probably died from bloodletting. In December 1799, he developed a throat infection. His doctors drained about half his blood over the course of a day. He died that night, almost certainly from shock and blood loss rather than the infection itself. But here's the thing. We didn't forget bloodletting because we lost the knowledge. We forgot it because we learned it was wrong. Once germ theory took hold in the late 1800s, once we understood infection and immunity and the actual function of blood, bloodletting became not just useless, but actively harmful. We didn't mourn its loss. We celebrated it. Some knowledge deserves to be forgotten. Some techniques should die. And that's hard to accept, isn't it? Because we've spent this whole night talking about lost wisdom, vanished innovations, the tragedy of forgetting. But not everything lost is a tragedy. Some things we lose because they were mistakes. Errors we finally corrected. Cruelties we finally recognized. Phrenology, the pseudoscience of reading personality from skull shape, was once taken seriously by respected scientists. Now it's a joke, a cautionary tale about confirmation bias and racist pseudoscience. We didn't lose phrenology, we outgrew it. Lobotomy, the surgical procedure where doctors cut into the brain's frontal lobe to treat mental illness, won a Nobel Prize in 1949. By the 1970s, it was recognized as barbaric, a practice that destroyed more lives than it helped. We didn't lose lobotomy, we abandoned it, horrified by what we'd done. So here's the first lesson. Not all forgetting is loss. Sometimes forgetting is progress. But that's the easy case. The hard cases are the ones where we can't quite tell, where we lost something that worked, that was elegant, that solved real problems. But we lost it anyway, for reasons we don't fully understand. Let's go back to Roman concrete. We talked about it before, how it lasted 2,000 years while modern concrete crumbles in decades. We've finally figured out the recipe, finally understood what made it so durable. But here's the question that haunts me. Why did we forget it in the first place? Rome fell in 456 AD. The empire collapsed, trade routes broke down, cities emptied. But concrete didn't stop working. The Pantheon was still standing. Aqueducts were still functional. People could see with their own eyes that this ancient building material was superior to anything they could make. So, why didn't they ask how? The answer is complicated. Part of it was economic. Roman concrete required specific volcanic ash from specific regions, and the infrastructure to transport it broke down. Part of it was political. The knowledge was concentrated in Rome, and when Rome fell, the experts scattered or died. Part of it was cultural. Medieval Europeans looked at Roman ruins and saw pagan architecture, something to be avoided or destroyed, not studied and preserved. But part of it, and this is the part that keeps me awake, was simply that people stopped caring. They had timber, stone, simpler methods. Roman concrete was good enough, sure, but it wasn't necessary. And when something isn't necessary, when it's just a little bit better rather than dramatically better, it's easy to let it slip away. We lose things not because we have to, but because we don't fight hard enough to keep them. And that's the second lesson. Preservation is a choice. It requires effort, intention, resources. Knowledge doesn't just survive on its own. Someone has to teach it. Someone has to write it down. Someone has to care. The Library of Alexandria is the classic example. Founded in the 3rd century BC, it held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. And then it burned, maybe once, maybe multiple times over centuries. The details are murky, but the result is clear. All that knowledge, gone. Except, here's what most people don't know. The Library of Alexandria didn't disappear overnight. It declined over centuries. Funding dried up. Scholars left. Scrolls weren't copied or maintained. By the time the final fire happened, whatever fire that was, the library was already a shadow of what it had been. It died of neglect long before it burned. And that's happening now today, in ways we barely notice. Indigenous languages dying because no one funded documentation projects. Craft traditions disappearing because young people pursue more profitable careers. Digital files eroding because we forgot to migrate them to new formats. We're living through a knowledge extinction event, and most of us don't even see it happening. Marie Wilcox, a Native American woman from California, spent 7 years creating a dictionary of Wuk-chumni, a language spoken by fewer than 10 people. She worked alone with no funding, recording every word she could remember from her childhood. When asked why, she said simply, "This is our history. If we lose the language, we lose ourselves." She's in her 80s now. When she's gone, Wuk-chumni will likely die with her, despite her dictionary. Because a dictionary isn't enough. Language is alive, its idioms and jokes, and the way words sound in your grandmother's voice. You can't preserve that in a book. So, here's the third lesson. Some knowledge can't be documented. It can only be lived. The wayfinding navigators of Polynesia, the ones who could read ocean swells and star paths. They didn't learn from textbooks. They learned by sailing for years with a master, absorbing thousands of tiny cues and corrections. The knowledge was in their bodies, their intuitions, their ability to feel the difference between types of waves. When that tradition was interrupted, when colonization forced children into Western schools instead of canoes, the knowledge began to die. Not because no one wrote it down, but because some things can't be written down. They have to be felt, embodied, lived. And we're bad at preserving that kind of knowledge. We're good at preserving facts, formulas, blueprints. But we're terrible at preserving wisdom, the kind that takes decades to develop, that can't be rushed or simplified or explained in a TED Talk. Damascus steel probably fell into this category. The Smiths knew what to do, but they couldn't explain why. The knowledge was in their hands, their judgment of color and sound and texture. When they died without apprentices to absorb that embodied skill, it died with them. So, what do? How do we hold on to knowledge that refuses to be held? The answer, I think, is uncomfortable. We can't. Not completely. Some knowledge is meant to be ephemeral. It exists in a specific time, a specific place, between specific people. And when those conditions change, the knowledge changes too, or vanishes. And maybe that's okay. Because here's the fourth lesson, the one that's hardest to accept. Letting go is sometimes necessary for growth. If we'd never abandoned bloodletting, we couldn't have developed modern medicine. If we'd clung too tightly to horse-drawn carriages, we wouldn't have cars. If we'd insisted on preserving every old technology, we'd be buried under the weight of the past, unable to move forward. Progress requires forgetting, not complete forgetting, not willful erasure, but a selective letting go. We keep what's essential, what's irreplaceable, and we release what's been superseded. The trick, the desperately difficult trick, is knowing the difference. Because sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes we let go of something essential, thinking it's obsolete, and then spend centuries trying to get it back. Roman concrete, Greek fire, Damascus steel. These weren't primitive technologies waiting to be replaced. They were solutions, elegant, effective, sometimes superior to anything we have now. We lost them not because we found something better, but because we stopped paying attention. So here's what I think about, lying awake at 3 in the morning. What are we losing right now? What knowledge, what skill, what way of seeing the world is slipping away while we're distracted by newer, shinier things? Are we preserving what matters? Or are we just accumulating data, mistaking quantity for wisdom? There's a difference between information and knowledge, and there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Information is facts. The Pantheon is 2,000 years old. It's made of concrete. The dome is 142 feet across. Knowledge is understanding. Roman concrete uses volcanic ash and seawater to create a self-healing matrix that strengthens over time. Wisdom is knowing when and why the matters, understanding that sometimes older solutions are better than newer ones, that durability might be more valuable than convenience, that we should study the past not to romanticize it, but to learn from it, and wisdom is the hardest thing to preserve. Because it's not just about knowing facts or techniques, it's about judgment, context, humility, the recognition that we don't know everything, that our ancestors weren't stupid, that progress isn't always forward. Indigenous cultures often have this wisdom embedded in their traditions. They've preserved knowledge across thousands of years, how to read ecosystems, how to manage forests, how to live sustainably in places Western science said were uninhabitable. For centuries, that knowledge was dismissed as superstition, primitive folklore. Now, as climate change accelerates, as biodiversity collapses, ecologists are rediscovering what indigenous people never forgot, that humans can live in balance with nature if we're willing to learn from those who've done it for millennia. But that means admitting we were wrong, that our advanced methods weren't always better, that we lost something valuable when we stopped listening to the old ways. And that's hard. It's hard to say, we messed up, we threw away wisdom we should have kept. But it's necessary, because the alternative is repeating the same mistakes over and over, losing more and more with each cycle. Here's the fifth lesson, and maybe the most important one. We honor the past, not by trying to recreate it, but by learning from it. We can't bring back Greek fire, and maybe we shouldn't. It was a weapon after all, designed to burn people alive. But we can learn from the principle that sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones we least expect. We can't resurrect Hedy Lamarr or Percy Julian or Alice Ball, but we can commit to recognizing genius wherever it appears, regardless of what it looks like. We can build systems that don't erase women, people of color, anyone whose voice has historically been silenced. We can't read Linear A or Rongo-Rongo, but we can fund linguists, support language revitalization, ensure that the languages still spoken today don't become the unreadable scripts of tomorrow. Every loss is a lesson. Every disappearance is a warning. And the warning is this: nothing is permanent. Not empires, not technologies, not even the ground under our feet. Everything we have, every innovation, every insight, every hard-won piece of wisdom exists because someone fought to preserve it. And if we stop fighting, it disappears. So what do we keep? What do we let go? How do we decide? I don't have a perfect answer, but I think it starts with attention, with noticing, with asking constantly, what am I taking for granted that might not always be here? The old man who knows how to repair vintage machines, the grandmother who remembers songs in a dying language, the craftsperson who still makes things by hand, the slow way, the beautiful way. These people are libraries, living repositories of knowledge that won't survive in any other form. And when they die, a little bit of human capability dies with them, unless we listen, unless we learn, unless we decide that some things are worth preserving, even if they're not profitable, even if they're not fashionable, even if they're harder than just buying a new one. That's the wisdom in letting go, knowing what to release and what to hold on to with both hands. And maybe, just maybe, we're getting better at it. Maybe we're learning from our losses. Maybe the next generation will be wiser, more careful, more intentional about what they preserve and what they abandon. Because the story doesn't end here. The forgetting isn't over. Right now, someone is inventing something that will change the world. And right now, someone else's knowledge is dying, unremarked, and unmourned. The question is, which will we choose to remember? So, here we are, at the end of a long night spent walking through shadows and silence, through inventions that changed the world and then vanished, through people who gave us gifts we never properly thanked them for, through objects that hold secrets we may never unlock. And maybe you're wondering, what was the point? Why spend hours dwelling on loss, on forgetting, on everything that slipped through humanity's fingers? Let me tell you why. Because nothing is ever truly lost. It only waits to be remembered. Every invention we talked about tonight, Greek fire, Damascus steel, Roman concrete, they're not gone. Not really. They left traces, echoes. The principles behind Greek fire led to modern incendiary weapons and fire suppression chemistry. The layering technique of Damascus steel influenced modern metallurgy and materials science. Roman concrete is being studied right now by engineers trying to build more sustainable infrastructure. The knowledge didn't disappear, it transformed. It went underground like a seed in winter, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. And the people, oh, the people. Hedy Lamarr's frequency hopping is in every wireless device you touch. Percy Julian's synthetic hormones save lives every single day. Alice Ball's treatment freed thousands from exile and suffering. Rosalind Franklin's Photo 51 is the foundation of all modern genetics. They're not forgotten. Not anymore. We're pulling their names back into the light, one biography at a time, one statue, one award, one moment of recognition. It's slow work and it's late, decades or centuries too late, but it's happening. Because here's what I've learned spending years studying these stories. Memory is a choice. History isn't what happened. It's what we decide to remember about what happened. And every time we choose to remember someone who was erased, every time we choose to honor knowledge that was dismissed, we're not just correcting the past, we're shaping the future. We're saying, this matters. You matter. What you created, what you discovered, what you gave to the world, it wasn't for nothing. And that choice, that active, intentional remembering, it changes us. Think about it. Before tonight, how many of these names had you heard? Louis Le Prince, who invented cinema. Jim Thompson, who disappeared into the jungle. Percy Julian, who made medicine affordable. Alice Ball, who cured leprosy at 23 years old. These aren't minor figures. They're not footnotes in someone else's story. They're giants, people who should be as famous as Edison or Einstein or any other name that gets taught in every school. But they were forgotten. Deliberately, systematically, cruelly forgotten. And now you know them. Now their names are in your mind, taking up space, demanding attention. You're part of the remembering now, part of the correction. That's not nothing. That's everything. Because the antidote to erasure is witness. The antidote to forgetting is story. And every person who hears these stories, who remembers these names, becomes a guardian of that knowledge, a keeper of the flame. You've become that tonight. Whether you meant to or not, whether you realize it or not, you're now carrying these stories forward. Maybe you'll tell someone about Hedy Lamarr's frequency hopping. Maybe you'll think about Roman concrete the next time you see a crumbling highway. Maybe, years from now, you'll remember Amelia Earhart's last words, "We are running north and south," and feel the weight of all the questions we can't answer. That's the power of remembering. It doesn't bring people back. It doesn't recreate lost inventions. But it keeps them alive in a different way. In our minds, in our conversations, in the way we see the world. And sometimes, remembering leads to recovery. In 2018, researchers at MIT announced they had successfully recreated self-healing Roman concrete. Not perfectly, not identically, but close enough to use in modern construction. They're now testing it in real buildings, real infrastructure, trying to build things that will last 2,000 years instead of 50. That's not just science, that's resurrection. That's taking something the world forgot and bringing it back to life. And it's happening with other lost knowledge too. Traditional ecological practices are being integrated into modern conservation. Indigenous navigation techniques are being taught alongside GPS. Ancient building methods, like the Persian yak chawl, are inspiring new approaches to passive cooling in a warming world. The past isn't dead. It's not even past, as Faulkner said. It's right here, right now, in every choice we make about what to preserve and what to pursue. So, what do we do with that? How do we live in a world where everything is fragile, where knowledge can vanish in a generation, where even the greatest genius can be erased by prejudice or bad luck or simple, stupid neglect? We pay attention. That's the first thing. We notice. We ask questions. We refuse to take anything for granted. When you see an old building, ask how it was made. When you meet an elderly person, ask what they remember. When you encounter a craft or a skill that seems outdated, ask yourself, is this really obsolete, or did we just stop valuing it? We document. We write things down, record them, preserve them in as many formats as possible. We don't assume that because something is common now, it will always be common. We don't assume that because everyone knows how to do something, someone will always know. The Rosetta Stone was created as a mundane government decree, 3 copies of the same boring administrative text. But because it was written in 3 languages, it became the key that unlocked 3,000 years of history. You never know what documentation will matter in the future, so document everything. We credit, we give names, We refuse to let work be attributed to researchers or a team or the company when we know which individual actually did the thinking, the creating, the discovering. We insist that Rosalind Franklin's name appear next to Watson and Crick's, that Alice Ball be recognized, not Arthur Dean. That history be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. We teach, we pass things on, not just to our children, though that's important, but to anyone who wants to learn. We become bridges between generations, between traditions, between ways of knowing that might otherwise never meet. And most importantly, we practice humility. We admit that we don't know everything, that our modern solutions aren't always better, that the people who came before us weren't primitive or stupid or superstitious. They were us, just with different tools and different challenges. When we approach the past with humility instead of arrogance, everything changes. We stop seeing lost knowledge as something we've progressed beyond and start seeing it as something we might desperately need. Because here's the truth that keeps me searching, keeps me studying, keeps me telling these stories. We're not smarter than our ancestors. We're just luckier. We have access to knowledge they accumulated over millennia. We stand on their shoulders. But shoulders are fragile, and if we don't maintain them, if we don't strengthen them, if we don't honor the people whose work holds us up, eventually we fall. So tonight, as we come to the end of this journey, I want you to think about one thing. What are you the last keeper of? What knowledge do you have that no one else has quite the same way? What skill, what memory, what way of doing things did you learn from someone who's gone now or going soon? Maybe it's your grandmother's recipe that was never written down. Maybe it's the way your father fixed cars by sound, just listening to the engine. Maybe it's a language you speak that's dying, or a song you remember from childhood, or just a way of seeing the world that feels increasingly rare. Whatever it is, it's precious. It's a thread in the fabric of human knowledge, and if it breaks, if you don't pass it on, that part of the pattern is lost forever. You're not just a person living your life. You're a library, a repository, a keeper of things that matter. And the world needs you to remember, because the story of human knowledge isn't a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment. It's a web, fragile, beautiful, constantly being torn and repaired. Some threads are strong, woven by thousands of people over centuries. Others are gossamer thin, held by a single person in a single moment. And every thread matters, every story matters, every name matters. Amelia Earhart, who flew toward the horizon and never came back, but showed a generation of women what was possible. Louis Le Prince, who invented cinema and vanished before he could claim it, but gave us a way to capture time itself. Hedy Lamarr, who was told to just look pretty, but invented the foundation of modern wireless communication. Percy Julian, who was denied entry to the ivory tower, but synthesized miracles in a paint factory. Alice Ball, who saved thousands and was erased from her own discovery, but whose work couldn't be buried forever. Rosalind Franklin, whose photograph unlocked the secret of life, even as her name was pushed into the shadows. The anonymous smiths who forged Damascus steel, the engineers who built the Yakchals, the navigators who read the ocean like a book, and all the others, the countless others whose names we'll never know, whose work we'll never fully understand, but who shaped the world anyway. They were here, they mattered, and we remember. That's what this night has been about. Not mourning what's lost, but honoring what remains. Not despairing at forgetting, but committing to remembering. Because the opposite of erasure isn't just memory, it's action. It's choosing every day to preserve what matters, to credit who deserves credit, to learn from the past instead of repeating its mistakes. And it's acknowledging that someday, we'll be the ones who are forgotten. Our technologies will seem quaint, our knowledge will be superseded, our names will fade into archives and footnotes if we're lucky, but maybe, just maybe, someone in the future will stumble across what we created. They'll wonder who we were, what we knew, why we did what we did, And if we're very lucky, if we've documented enough, preserved enough, taught enough, they'll understand. They'll see that we weren't perfect, that we made mistakes, lost things we should have kept things we should have lost. But they'll also see that we tried, that we cared, that we looked at the wreckage of history and said, let's do better. That's the legacy worth leaving. Not perfect preservation of everything, that's impossible, but conscious, intentional care for what matters most. So as you drift off tonight, as your mind settles into sleep, let these stories settle with you. Let them become part of how you see the world. And maybe, in the morning, you'll look at things a little differently. You'll see the concrete under your feet and wonder how long it will last. You'll hear a song in a language you don't know and think about what wisdom might be encoded in those sounds. You'll meet someone elderly and think, what do they know that no one else does? What should I ask before it's too late? Because nothing is ever truly lost. It only waits to be remembered. And you are the remembering. You are the one who carries it forward. Thank you for being here tonight, for listening to these quiet stories about loud disappearances and silent endurance, for caring about people you'd never heard of and inventions you'll never touch. You've become a keeper now, a guardian, part of the long chain of human memory that stretches from the first stories told around the first fires to whatever future we're building toward. And that future needs these stories. It needs to know that brilliance can be fragile, that memory is work, that nothing is too important to forget if we're not careful. So, be careful, be attentive, be humble enough to learn from the past and brave enough to preserve what matters for the future. Sleep well tonight. Dream of inventors and explorers, of ancient concrete and mysterious manuscripts, of all the things we've lost and all the things we might still find. And when you wake, remember, the world is full of forgotten wonders, and every single one of them is waiting for someone like you to notice, to care, to bring them back into the light. Until we meet again, until the next story finds you in the quiet hours. Good night.